Winter of 1947. The blizzard tore through Chicago like death's own breath, turning the city into a frozen wasteland where only the desperate or dangerous dared venture out. At Central Station, a woman sat alone, medical bag clutched to her chest, shivering in a coat too thin for the brutal cold. Wren Holloway, once a respected nurse, now jobless and nearly penniless, had exactly $4.75 to her name and nowhere to go. The last train had departed hours ago, and the station would close at midnight. With nowhere else to shelter, Wren faced the very real possibility of freezing to death in the worst Chicago winter in decades. Her fingers had gone numb, her lips turning blue as she pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders. "Just keep breathing," she whispered to herself, the words forming white clouds in the frigid air. Someone will come. But no one had come for Wren in a long time. Not when Dr. Spencer had cornered her in the supply room at Mercy General. Not when she'd defended herself with a surgical scalpel, leaving him with a scar he'd never forget. Not when his lies had cost her job, reputation, and future in one fell swoop. A black Cadillac pulled up outside the station, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. Wren paid it no mind. Such luxury belonged to a world far removed from her current desperation. The car door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored overcoat, his polished shoes crunching on the snow as he approached the station. A black fedora shielded his face from the biting wind. But even from a distance, his posture radiated authority and danger. Archer Sterling was not a man who frequented train stations. The heir to Chicago's most powerful crime family typically traveled with drivers, bodyguards, and all the trappings of someone who controlled half the city's illegal operations. But tonight was different. A meeting with suppliers from Detroit had gone south, leaving him without his usual entourage and with an urgent need to make a phone call away from prying eyes. As he entered the station, he immediately registered the presence of the woman on the bench. Years of surviving in his world had honed his awareness of his surroundings to a razor's edge. She was alone, clearly in distress, but what caught his eye was the medical bag at her side. High-quality leather, worn but well-maintained, with the insignia of Mercy General Hospital barely visible on its side. Wren looked up as the door opened, a blast of cold air preceding the man's entrance. Their eyes met briefly, and something in his gaze made her straighten her posture, defiance overriding desperation. She knew his type: wealthy, powerful men who took what they wanted without consequence. Chicago was full of them. Archer approached the ticket counter, but found it abandoned, the station attendant likely taking shelter in a back room from the bitter cold. He turned, surveying the empty station more carefully. Just him and the woman with the medical bag. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Is the station master around?" Wren shook her head, her teeth chattering too hard to form words properly. Up close, Archer could see how dangerously cold she was, the blue tinge to her lips, the violent trembling. "You're freezing," he stated flatly, removing his gloves and approaching her. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," she managed, pride stronger than common sense. "You're hypothermic," he corrected, clinical and certain. Without asking permission, he pressed his bare hand to her forehead, confirming what he already knew. "How long have you been sitting here? Why do you care?" Wren challenged, though her voice lacked the strength to make it truly defiant. Archer's expression remained impassive, but something shifted in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that this half-frozen woman had the courage to question him. Few people in Chicago dared speak to him with anything less than deference. "You're a nurse," he nodded toward her bag. "Mercy General?" "Not anymore," she replied bitterly. Archer made a decision then, one that would alter the course of both their lives. He removed his heavy cashmere overcoat and draped it around her shoulders. "My car is outside. It's warm. There's a phone. You need to get out of this cold before you die." Wren stiffened, immediately suspicious. "I don't go to strange men's cars." A ghost of a smile touched Archer's lips. "Sensible policy. But tonight, it's either my car or this station. And this station will be your coffin by morning." The brutal honesty of his assessment cut through her defenses. He was right, and they both knew it. "I have a gun in my bag," she lied, meeting his gaze directly. "Try anything and I'll use it." Instead of taking offense, Archer seemed almost amused. "Noted. Can you walk?" When Wren tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, Archer caught her, one arm around her waist, the other retrieving her medical bag. The casual strength with which he supported her weight told its own story about the man. "What's your name?" he asked as he guided her toward the door. Wren Holloway. Archer Sterling." The name registered immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew the Sterling family, their legitimate businesses in shipping, construction, and nightclubs, and their rumored control of everything from protection rackets to smuggling operations. The newspapers called Thomas Sterling Chicago's gentleman gangster, and his son was said to be even more dangerous, the brains behind their expanding empire. Wren stiffened, trying to pull away. "I know who you are." Archer's grip remained firm but not painful. "Then you know I could have had one of my men handle this. But here I am, personally making sure you don't freeze to death in a train station. Make of that what you will." As they stepped outside into the howling blizzard, Wren had to admit he had a point. The warmth of his coat enveloped her, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and something distinctly masculine. The Cadillac waited, engine running, heat beckoning. "Why were you at the station?" she asked, curiosity temporarily overriding caution. Archer helped her into the passenger seat before answering. "Same reason as you, I suspect," he said, sliding behind the wheel, looking for a way out of the storm. As the car pulled away from the curb, neither of them realized they'd just found something far more significant than temporary shelter. They'd found a collision course with destiny that would reshape Chicago's underworld forever. The Cadillac glided through Chicago's snow-covered streets, its heater gradually bringing feeling back to Wren's frozen extremities. Pain replaced numbness, a good sign medically, though torturous to experience. She flexed her fingers inside the borrowed gloves Archer had wordlessly handed her, too proud to acknowledge the agony of returning circulation. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "Somewhere safe," Archer replied, his focus on navigating the treacherous roads. "There's a diner a few blocks ahead, still open despite the storm. You need hot food." The car turned onto Michigan Avenue, passing darkened storefronts and the occasional desperate figure hunched against the blizzard. Chicago after dark was always dangerous, doubly so in weather like this. "The medical bag," Archer said, nodding toward it at her feet. "You said you're not at Mercy General anymore. What happened?" Wren stiffened, defensive walls rising instantly. "That's not a story I share with strangers." "Fair enough." He didn't press, which surprised her. Men like him were used to getting answers. Instead, he offered information freely. "The Sterling Hotel is 8 blocks from here. I own it. You can have a room tonight, no questions asked. Tomorrow, when you're warm and rested, you can decide your next move." "Why would you help me?" Suspicion laced her voice. Archer's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Maybe I recognize someone who's been dealt a bad hand." A pause then. "Or maybe I just need a nurse." Before Wren could respond, the car pulled up outside a small diner, windows glowing with warm light that spilled onto the snow outside. "Murphy's All-Night Diner," the sign proclaimed. Inside, the warmth was almost painful against Wren's cold-stung face. The place was nearly empty, just a tired-looking waitress, a cook visible through the service window, and an elderly man nursing coffee at the counter. "Booth in the back," Archer directed, guiding Wren with a hand that didn't quite touch her back. The waitress approached, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized Archer. "Mr. Sterling, sir. Didn't expect to see you tonight. Coffee, Nancy. The strongest you have, and whatever soup's hot." "Yes, sir. Right away." As the waitress hurried off, Wren studied the man across from her. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, she could see him clearly for the first time. Handsome in a severe way, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that missed nothing. Not yet 30, she guessed, but with a hardness that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "From a gangster?" His mouth quirked slightly. "From a Sterling." He acknowledged this with a slight incline of his head. "Most people who know that name never meet the man behind it. Consider yourself unusual." The coffee arrived, steaming and black. Wren wrapped her hands around the mug, savoring the heat that seeped into her bones. "I was fired 3 weeks ago," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "From Mercy General. I worked the surgical ward." Archer didn't respond, simply waited for her to continue. "Dr. Nathan Spencer is the chief surgeon, respected, connected, married to a socialite from one of Chicago's oldest families." Her voice hardened. "He cornered me in the supply closet during night shift. Told me how he could help my career if I was accommodating." Understanding darkened Archer's expression. "And you weren't." I grabbed a scalpel. Told him if he touched me, he'd need someone else to stitch him up. A ghost of satisfaction crossed her face. When he didn't listen, I made sure he'd remember the lesson. "Good," Archer said simply with a conviction that startled her. "Not according to the hospital board." He claimed I attacked him unprovoked, that I'd been making advances and became violent when rejected. His word against mine. Bitterness crept into her voice. 3 years of perfect evaluations meant nothing. I was fired, my reputation destroyed. No hospital in Chicago will hire me now. The soup arrived thick beef stew that smelled like salvation. Wren hadn't eaten properly in days. So you were leaving the city? Archer deduced, watching her eat. She nodded. I had a lead on a position at a veterans hospital in Detroit, but my train was canceled due to the storm, and She hesitated, pride warring with honesty. I couldn't afford another night at the boarding house. And Dr. Spencer? He continues practicing, I assume. Something in Archer's tone made Wren look up sharply. There was a coldness there, a calculating quality that reminded her exactly who she was speaking with. He does. His kind always lands on their feet. Not always, Archer murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. They finished their meal in silence. When Archer paid, Wren noticed how the waitress refused to meet his eyes as she took his money, how her hands trembled slightly. Outside, the storm had intensified. The Cadillac, now covered in a fresh layer of snow, started immediately, despite the cold. I have a proposition for you, Miss Holloway, Archer said as they pulled away from the curb. Wren tensed. Here it was, the catch, the price for his help. My father is ill, he continued, surprising her. Lung complaint. The doctor who's been treating him is inadequate, and my father is not a man who tolerates hospitals. I'm a nurse, not a doctor, Wren pointed out. A nurse with surgical training and, evidently, exceptional skills with a scalpel. There was that ghost of a smile again. More importantly, someone with the courage to stand their ground when threatened. A rare quality. The car turned onto Lakeshore Drive, following the shoreline north toward the wealthy neighborhoods where old money and new criminals lived in uneasy proximity. I'm offering you a position, Archer clarified, as my father's private nurse. Room, board, and a salary that would exceed what you made at Mercy General. In return, you provide medical care and discretion. Wren's mind raced. Working for the Sterling family meant entering a world of danger and moral compromise, but it also meant survival, the chance to practice medicine again. And she had to admit a certain satisfaction in finding shelter with people beyond Dr. Spencer's influence. Why me? She asked finally. You could hire any nurse in the city with a snap of your fingers. Perhaps. Archer turned the car down, a private drive flanked by iron gates. But I need someone who understands that survival sometimes requires unconventional methods. Someone who doesn't flinch. Ahead loomed Sterling Manor, a limestone mansion set back from the road, lights glowing in defiance of the storm. Guards patrolled the perimeter, barely visible through the swirling snow. You don't know me, Wren said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Archer stopped the car, turning to face her fully for the first time. I know enough. I know you're a survivor. I know you're principled but not naive. I know you had a scalpel in your medical bag, not a gun, but were willing to use it if necessary. The precision of his assessment was unnerving. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement, he continued. You need security and employment. I need someone with medical expertise who can be trusted with sensitive matters. The implication hung between them. Working for the Sterlings would mean treating gunshot wounds that couldn't be reported, injuries that couldn't be explained to authorities. 1 week, Wren decided, meeting his gaze directly. I'll stay for 1 week. If either of us is unsatisfied, I leave with no consequences and enough money for a ticket to Detroit. Archer considered her counteroffer, then extended his hand. Agreed. When Wren placed her hand in his to seal their arrangement, she couldn't help but notice how warm his grip was, how strong yet carefully restrained. Like everything else about Archer Sterling, his handshake contained both promise and warning. Neither of them could have imagined how that simple agreement, made in a snowstorm outside Chicago's most notorious criminal residence, would ultimately change the landscape of power in the city forever. Sterling Manor was a testament to the power of illicit wealth, a sprawling limestone fortress whose elegance masked its origins. As Archer led Wren through the grand entrance, she couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of a household accustomed to danger. The strategic placement of guards disguised as staff, the slight bulge of shoulder holsters beneath tailored suits, the way every entrance and exit was constantly monitored. Jackson will take your bag to your quarters, Archer said, nodding to a stern-faced man who materialized from the shadows. First, you should meet my father. Wren instinctively clutched her medical bag tighter. Now? It's nearly midnight. My father keeps unusual hours, Archer replied, guiding her up a sweeping staircase. and he's been waiting for a competent medical professional for weeks. The second floor of the mansion was quieter, more private. They passed a library filled with leather-bound books that Wren suspected had never been read, a study with maps of Chicago pinned to the walls, and finally stopped before a heavy oak door guarded by a man whose impassive face couldn't quite hide the damage of old violence. "Victor," Archer acknowledged. "Is he awake?" "Yes, sir. Coughing spell about 20 minutes ago." Archer turned to Wren. "My father doesn't know I've brought you here. He's resistant to accepting help. Let me do the talking initially." Before Wren could respond, Archer pushed open the door. The master bedroom was opulent but stifling, heavy curtains drawn against the night, a fire blazing despite the already warm temperature. The air smelled of menthol, tobacco, and the unmistakable staleness of sickroom confinement. Thomas Sterling sat propped against a mountain of pillows, his once powerful frame now gaunt, skin stretched tight over aristocratic features that his son had clearly inherited. Despite his obvious illness, his eyes were sharp and alert as they fixed on Wren. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice a rasp that ended in a suppressed cough. "I told you no more doctors, Archer." "She's a nurse, not a doctor," Archer replied calmly. "And she's here as my guest, not your keeper." The old man's gaze raked over Wren, assessing. "Mercy, General, by the look of that bag." "What's your name, girl?" "Wren Holloway, sir." She stepped forward, professional demeanor sliding into place despite her exhaustion. "Surgical nurse, 5 years experience." Thomas snorted. "And what brings a Mercy General nurse to the doorstep of Chicago's most notorious family? Slumming? Or running from something?" Wren met his gaze directly. "Both, I suppose." A surprised chuckle escaped the old man, quickly transforming into a coughing fit that doubled him over. Without thinking, Wren moved to his side, medical instincts overriding caution. She placed a hand on his back, feeling the weakness in his lungs, the labor of each breath. "You need to sit up straighter," she instructed, already adjusting his pillows. "And this room is too hot and dry. It's making your cough worse." Thomas Sterling, who had ordered the deaths of men for lesser presumptions, merely raised an eyebrow at her boldness. "Open a window," she directed Archer, who complied without comment. "And this," she picked up a bottle of medicine from the bedside table, uncorked it, and wrinkled her nose, "is little more than alcohol and sugar." "Who prescribed this?" "Dr. Monroe," Archer supplied. "Family physician for 20 years, and family friend who knows better than to ask questions about gunshot wounds," Thomas added bluntly. "What would you prescribe, Nurse Holloway?" Wren opened her medical bag, removed her stethoscope, and gestured toward Thomas's chest. "May I?" After a moment's consideration, he nodded. She listened carefully to his lungs, her expression professionally neutral despite the concerning sounds she heard. "How long have you been coughing up blood?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I didn't say I was." "You didn't need to. The handkerchief by your bed tells me enough." She straightened. "You have pneumonia, possibly tuberculosis. Without proper treatment, your condition will worsen." "So I've been told," Thomas said dismissively. "Monroe gives me 6 months. With proper care, you could have years," Wren countered. "But not if you insist on roasting yourself alive in this room with useless tonics as your only medicine." Archer watched this exchange with carefully concealed amazement. Few people spoke to his father with such directness, certainly not a woman they'd just met, and absolutely not someone who understood exactly who and what Thomas Sterling was. The old crime boss studied Wren for a long moment, then looked to his son. "Where did you find this one?" "Central Station," Archer answered truthfully, freezing to death with nowhere to go. Thomas's gaze returned to Wren. "And yet you speak to me as if you have options." "Everyone has options, Mr. Sterling," she replied evenly. "Including you. Live or die. That's your choice. I'm simply telling you which path leads where." A tense silence followed, broken only by the howling wind outside the now open window. Then, remarkably, Thomas Sterling began to laugh, a genuine laugh that didn't dissolve into coughing. "I like her," he declared to Archer. "She can stay." He fixed Wren with a penetrating stare. "On one condition. No hospitals. Whatever care I need happens here." "That's not ideal," Wren began. "It's non-negotiable," Thomas cut her off. "I didn't build what I have by dying in some public ward surrounded by strangers." Wren considered the ethical implications. Proper medical care required facilities she couldn't access here, but the stubborn set of the old man's jaw told her this was indeed a deal-breaker. "I'll need supplies," she countered. "Real medicine, equipment, and your absolute cooperation as a patient." Thomas extended his hand, a businessman to the end. Agreed. As Wren shook his hand, she felt the weight of her decision settling around her. She was now officially in the employ of Chicago's most dangerous family, bound by an agreement that put her medical ethics in direct conflict with her survival instincts. "Show her to her quarters, Archer," Thomas instructed, suddenly looking tired. "And for God's sake, give her whatever she needs. I haven't heard the truth from a medical professional in 20 years. It's refreshing." Outside in the hallway, Archer studied Wren with new interest. "That was unexpected." "What was?" "My father, listening to you, agreeing to treatment." He shook his head slightly. "He respects strength and honesty. You showed him both." Wren was too exhausted to fully process the significance of this. "I was just doing my job." "No," Archer corrected her. "You were doing much more than that. You were treating him like a man, not a criminal kingpin everyone's afraid to contradict." As they walked toward the guest wing, Wren felt Archer's eyes on her, assessing, reconsidering. "You're not what I expected either, Mr. Sterling," she admitted. "Archer," he corrected. "If you're going to be living under our roof, treating my father, we should dispense with formalities." They stopped before a door at the end of a quiet hallway. "These will be your quarters," he explained, opening the door to reveal a suite that was larger than any apartment Wren had ever lived in. "The room has its own telephone line, private bathroom. Anything else you need, just ask Eleanor. She runs the household." Wren stepped into the room, momentarily overwhelmed by the luxury, the four-poster bed with silk sheets, the plush carpets, the sitting area with its own fireplace already lit against the winter chill. "Why?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. "Why go to all this trouble for your father? For me? The Sterlings have resources. You could have hired any medical professional in the country." Archer remained in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. "Because my father is dying," he said simply. "And because when I saw you in that station, someone with nothing left to lose but still fighting, I recognized something familiar." The admission hung between them, unexpectedly personal from a man who had clearly spent years perfecting his emotional armor. "Get some rest, Wren," he said finally. "Tomorrow you can tell me what supplies you need for my father. And perhaps we can discuss your situation at Mercy General." The subtle emphasis on those last words sent a chill down Wren's spine that had nothing to do with the winter storm still raging outside. "What do you mean?" "Just that injustice has a way of being corrected in this city, particularly when it involves the Sterling family's interests." With that cryptic statement, he bid her good night and closed the door, leaving Wren alone with the sudden, unsettling realization that she had just aligned herself with a power that could protect her or destroy her with equal ease. Morning arrived with a clarity that only follows great storms, brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow. The world transformed into something both beautiful and treacherous. Wren woke disoriented, the silk sheets and unfamiliar luxury momentarily bewildering until memory rushed back. The train station, Archer Sterling, his father, their agreement. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of a middle-aged woman with practical clothes and shrewd eyes. "Good morning, Miss Holloway. I'm Eleanor Thompson, housekeeper." She set down a breakfast tray on the bedside table. "Mr. Sterling asked me to bring you breakfast and help you get settled." "What time is it?" Wren asked, embarrassed to have slept so late. "Nearly 10. Mr. Sterling said to let you rest." Eleanor's efficient hands opened curtains, straightened already immaculate furniture. "He's in his study whenever you're ready. No rush." The breakfast was extravagant eggs, bacon, fresh bread, still warm from the oven, coffee that smelled like heaven after weeks of watery diner brew. Wren ate gratefully, watching through the window as men cleared paths through snow-covered gardens below. After washing and dressing in the clothes Eleanor had somehow produced in her exact size. "We keep necessities for guests," was her only explanation. Wren steeled herself to face whatever the day would bring. The mansion was different by daylight, less menacing, more stately. Guards remained stationed at strategic points, but they blended better with the daytime household activities. Wren found her way to the study where she'd been told Archer waited, noting with professional interest the layout of the house, potential exits, the rhythm of household staff movements. Archer Sterling stood at a large desk covered with papers and ledgers, his back to the door as he spoke quietly on the telephone. He wore no jacket, his crisp white shirt and tailored vest emphasizing the lean strength of his frame. Without turning, he motioned for her to enter and take a seat. "Yes, I understand," he was saying. "Tell Rossetti we'll meet his price, but the quality better reflect it." A pause. "No, that matter is being handled separately. Just focus on the shipment." Another pause. Good. Report back when it's done. He hung up, turning to face Ren with an expression that seamlessly shifted from business to something more personable, a transition so smooth she almost missed it. Did you sleep well? He asked, taking a seat across from her. Better than I have in weeks, she admitted. Thank you. I had Eleanor prepare this for you. He slid a folder across the desk. Medical supplies, equipment, medicines. Check the list and add anything you need for my father's care. Ren opened the folder, scanning the meticulously typed inventory with growing astonishment. It was comprehensive, better stocked than many small hospitals. Surgical instruments, antibiotics that were difficult to obtain even for established medical facilities, oxygen equipment, and more. This is extensive, she said carefully. Some of these items require prescriptions, special permits. Archer's smile contained no humor. Bureaucratic obstacles aren't an issue for us. Of course they weren't. The Sterlings probably had doctors, pharmacists, and government officials on their payroll throughout Chicago. For the first time, Ren fully comprehended the reach of the organization she'd aligned herself with. I checked on my father this morning, Archer continued. He's already instructed the household to follow your medical directives without question. That's unprecedented. Ren set down the list. Mr. Sterling. Archer, he corrected again. Archer, she conceded. I need to understand exactly what I've agreed to here. Last night was chaos. I was freezing, desperate, not thinking clearly. Today, I need clarity. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Ask your questions. What exactly do you expect from me? Beyond caring for your father. Nothing beyond that at present, he replied. My father's health is my priority. Everything else is secondary. And after he recovers? Or if he doesn't? Archer leaned forward slightly. That's entirely up to you. I meant what I said about our agreement. 1 week, then you decide. If you choose to stay, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement. There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that suggested he was withholding something. Ren pressed further. And Dr. Spencer? Last night you mentioned my situation at Mercy General. A coolness entered Archer's expression. What would you like to happen to Dr. Spencer? The question was deceptively simple, but Ren understood its implications immediately. She was being offered justice or revenge, depending on how one viewed it. I don't want him hurt, she said firmly. That's not who I am. Admirable, Archer commented, though she couldn't tell if he was sincere or mocking. But there are many ways to address injustice without physical harm. His reputation, his position, his standing in the medical community, all can be adjusted. The proposition hung in the air between them, tempting, dangerous. Ren had fantasized about Spencer losing everything, just as she had. But having that power suddenly within reach was different, disturbing. I need to think about that, she said finally. Of course. Archer stood, moving to a cabinet where he poured 2 glasses of water. There's something else we should discuss. Your presence here won't go unnoticed for long. Chicago's medical community is small, and the Sterling name attracts attention. Questions will be asked about why you're here. I assumed as much. Ren accepted the glass he offered. What's your point? We need a cover story. Something plausible that explains your presence without inviting unwanted scrutiny. Such as? Archer's expression remained carefully neutral. Several possibilities. You could officially be employed as a private nurse, which is true, but might attract attention from your former colleagues. You could be presented as a distant family relation staying with us during difficult times. He hesitated almost imperceptibly before continuing. Or you could be introduced as my companion. Personal relationships tend to discourage certain types of questions. Ren nearly choked on her water. Your companion? You mean, it would be for appearances only, he clarified quickly. But it would explain your presence in the household, your access to family spaces, and would discourage any interference from business associates, who might otherwise see you as a potential weakness to exploit. The calculation behind the suggestion was evident, but Ren couldn't help feeling there was something more to it, something in the careful way. Archer avoided meeting her eyes directly as he proposed it. That seems unnecessarily complicated, she objected. Surely private nurse is sufficient? Perhaps, Archer returned to his seat. But private nurses can be bribed, threatened, or removed. A personal connection to me would place you under a different kind of protection. Understanding dawned. You're worried about rival families, about them targeting me to get to your father's medical care. I'm concerned about all potential vulnerabilities, he corrected. My father's illness isn't public knowledge, but secrets don't stay buried long in Chicago. When word spreads that Thomas Sterling is being treated privately, rather than at his usual physician's office, people will draw conclusions. Wren considered her options. The idea of pretending to be romantically involved with Archer Sterling was absurd and potentially dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with rival gangsters, yet she couldn't deny the logic of his reasoning. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But for now, let's stick with private nurse. I need to establish a treatment plan for your father before worrying about Chicago gossip." Archer nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "There's one more thing." He opened a drawer and removed an envelope, sliding it across the desk. "Your first week's salary, in advance." Wren opened the envelope, her eyes widening at the cash inside, more money than she'd earned in 3 months at Mercy General. "This is too much," she protested. "It's the standard rate for private medical care for the Sterling family," Archer replied. "We pay well for discretion and excellence. You've already demonstrated both." Before Wren could respond, the door opened without a knock. Victor Hayes, Archer's right-hand man, entered with an urgency that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "Boss, there's a situation at the club," he said, barely acknowledging Wren's presence. "Rossetti's men are causing trouble, armed." Archer's transformation was instantaneous, the reasonable businessman vanishing behind something harder, more dangerous. He stood, already reaching for his jacket. "Have the car brought around. Tell Quinn to secure my father's wing." He turned to Wren. "Stay in the house. Eleanor will assist with anything you need for my father." "Is everything all right?" Wren asked, though the answer was obvious. Archer paused at the door, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Just business. Nothing for you to worry about." Then, almost as an afterthought, "But perhaps consider my suggestion about your position here more carefully. Days like this remind me why appearances matter in our world." After they departed, Wren remained in the study, the envelope of money still in her hand, the weight of Archer's proposition heavy in her mind. She had entered the Sterling world seeking sanctuary, but now found herself navigating currents far more complex than she'd anticipated. The money represented freedom enough to leave Chicago, start fresh somewhere Spencer's influence couldn't reach. Yet something kept her rooted in place, professional obligation to her patient, curiosity about this dangerous world she'd stumbled into, and, though she was reluctant to admit it even to herself, a growing fascination with Archer Sterling, a man who rescued freezing nurses and ordered who knew what kind of handling of business rivals with equal composure. "What have I gotten myself into?" she whispered to the empty room. Only the distant sound of car engines accelerating down the driveway answered her question. Days at Sterling Manor followed a rhythm unlike anything in Wren's previous experience. Mornings began with checking Thomas Sterling's condition, monitoring his breathing, administering medications she'd specified from Archer's impressive list of supplies, and coaxing the stubborn old man to follow her treatment plan. "You're worse than the nuns at St. Mary's," Thomas complained on the third morning as Wren forced him to sit upright for breathing exercises. "At least they feared God's judgment. You don't seem to fear anything." "I fear pneumonia more than I fear your scowling," she replied, unfazed. Again, 10 deep breaths. To her surprise, the old crime boss complied, grudging respect evident in his eyes. Their relationship had developed an unexpected rapport, his gruff defiance meeting her unflinching persistence. Within just these few days, his color had improved, the bloody handkerchiefs had become less frequent, and his appetite had begun to return. Afternoons found Wren exploring the mansion's extensive grounds, weather permitting, or familiarizing herself with the surprisingly well-stocked medical room Archer had established per her specifications. Eleanor shadowed her initially ostensibly to assist, though Wren suspected surveillance was the primary motivation. "Mr. Sterling doesn't usually bring outsiders into the house," Eleanor admitted on the 4th day as she helped Wren organize medical supplies. "Especially not women who aren't professionally entertaining." Wren's hand stilled. "You mean I'm not the first woman he's rescued from train stations?" Eleanor's laugh was genuine. "You're the first person he's rescued from anywhere, as far as I know. Mr. Archer isn't known for his charitable impulses. Then why me?" Wren asked, the question that had been plaguing her since that first night. The housekeeper considered her thoughtfully. "I've worked for the Sterlings since before Archer was born. Watched him grow from a boy learning his father's business to the man he is now. He's always been controlled, calculating, even when he was young." She folded a stack of bandages with practiced efficiency. "But there's something else in him, something he keeps buried. Maybe he saw something in you that speaks to that part of him." Before Wren could press further, they were interrupted by Victor Hayes, who seemed to materialize in doorways throughout the house with unsettling regularity. Mr. Sterling requests your presence in his study, he informed Wren, his tone making it clear this was not optional. The study had become Archer's domain, a place where household staff entered only when summoned, where telephone conversations abruptly ended when others approached. Today, he stood by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, a glass of amber liquid in his hand despite the early hour. "You wanted to see me?" Wren asked, remaining near the door. Archer turned, and she was startled by his appearance, a darkening bruise along his jawline, a small cut above his right eyebrow. Evidence of violence that hadn't been there yesterday. "How is my father today?" he asked, ignoring her obvious concern. "Improving. His fever is down, breathing easier." She stepped closer. "What happened to you?" "Business disagreement," he replied dismissively. "Nothing significant. It should be cleaned properly," Wren said, professional instincts overriding her hesitation. "Head wounds can infect easily." Something like amusement flickered across his face. "Are you offering your services, Nurse Holloway?" "It's my job," she replied simply. After a moment's consideration, Archer gestured to a chair. "Very well." Wren retrieved her medical bag from where she'd left it in the hallway, returning to find him seated, jacket removed, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle. She noted additional bruising on his knuckles as she set out antiseptic and bandages. "The other guy looks worse, I assume?" she asked, dampening a cloth. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There were 3 other guys, actually. Wren raised an eyebrow but said nothing, focusing instead on cleaning the cut above his eye. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, his breathing steady despite her proximity. She worked in professional silence, aware of his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You have steady hands," he observed quietly. "Essential in surgery," she replied, applying antiseptic that must have stung, though he didn't flinch. "Is this a regular occurrence in your line of work? Disagreements?" "Unfortunately, physical violence," she clarified, moving to examine his bruised knuckles. Archer watched her gentle examination of his hands. "Less frequent than you might imagine. We prefer more civilized methods of conflict resolution when possible. But sometimes, demonstrations of strength are necessary." Wren finished her ministrations and began repacking her supplies. "This is what you were protecting me from, when you suggested I be introduced as your companion?" "Yes." His directness was startling. "The Rossetti family is becoming problematic. If they knew my father's condition, they might see opportunity. If they knew you were treating him, you'd become a target. And being associated with you personally would deter them? It would make targeting you an act of war rather than business." Archer leaned forward, his expression grave. "Wren, there are rules even in our world, lines that aren't crossed without consequences. Family is one of those lines." The implication hung between them, weighted with significance beyond professional arrangement. To claim her as personal rather than employee would place her within a protected circle, but would also bind her to this world in ways that might prove inescapable. "Your week is almost up," he continued, changing the subject abruptly. "You'll need to decide soon whether you're staying." Wren hadn't forgotten their original agreement, but the reminder sent an unexpected pang through her. "Your father needs at least several more weeks of consistent care." "Is that a yes?" "It's a medical assessment," she corrected. "I haven't decided yet." Archer nodded, accepting her ambivalence. "There's a dinner tomorrow night. Here, at the house. Family business associates, some political figures. My father insists on making an appearance to quell rumors about his health." "That's not advisable," Wren objected. "His lungs are still weak, and exposure to crowds. He'll do it with or without medical approval," Archer interrupted. "Thomas Sterling doesn't accept physical limitations easily." A pause. "I'd like you to attend. As my guest." The invitation caught her off guard. "Why?" "Several reasons. To monitor my father discreetly. To be introduced to certain people who should know you're under Sterling protection." He hesitated slightly. "And because I'd enjoy your company." The last reason, delivered almost casually, shifted something in the atmosphere between them. This wasn't merely a strategic move or professional requirement. It was personal. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a gangster dinner party," she said, falling back on practicality. Archer's smile was unexpected and transformative, softening the habitual severity of his features. "That can be arranged. Eleanor has excellent taste and connections with the best shops in Chicago." Wren should have refused. The professional boundaries between patient's son and nurse were already dangerously blurred. Attending a Sterling family function would erase them further. Yet she found herself nodding. "All right. But I'll need to check on your father throughout the evening." "Of course." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Eleanor will help you with preparations. And Wren, she paused at the door, looking back. Consider my suggestion about your position here. After tomorrow night, certain assumptions may be made regardless of any official explanation. The warning, or was it an invitation, followed her through the rest of the day, a persistent whisper beneath the routine of medical duties and household navigation. By attending this dinner as Archer Sterling's guest, she would be crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. The dress Eleanor brought was midnight blue silk that whispered against Wren's skin, cut to suggest rather than flaunt, elegant without being ostentatious. Looking in the mirror, Wren barely recognized herself. Hair styled in soft waves, a simple pearl necklace at her throat, borrowed from Eleanor, and a woman looking back whose eyes held both uncertainty and determination. "You look beautiful, miss," Eleanor said, making final adjustments. "Mr. Archer will be pleased." "This isn't about pleasing Mr. Archer," Wren objected automatically. "It's about monitoring his father's health during the dinner." Eleanor's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe this for a moment. "Of course. That's why he had 3 shops send over their finest evening wear for your selection." Before Wren could formulate a suitable response, a knock announced Victor Hayes, who would escort her downstairs. Unlike his usual utilitarian attire, tonight he wore a formal suit that failed to disguise the weapon holstered beneath. "Mr. Sterling is greeting guests," he informed her, as they descended the grand staircase. "He asked me to escort you to the drawing room and ensure you're comfortable until he can join you." The drawing room already held a dozen or so people, men in expensive suits, women draped in furs and jewels despite the warmth of the room. Conversations paused momentarily as Wren entered, curious eyes assessing, calculating her presence. "Scotch?" Victor offered, guiding her toward a drinks table. "Just water," she replied, acutely aware of being observed. "I need to keep my wits about me." Victor's expression might have held a flicker of approval as he handed her a crystal glass. "Good instinct. Not everyone here is a friend of the family." He nodded subtly toward a silver-haired man deep in conversation with 2 city officials Wren recognized from newspaper photographs. Carlo Rossetti, head of the Rossetti family, ostensibly here to discuss territory agreements, though his real purpose is assessing Mr. Thomas's condition. Wren sipped her water, studying the man who had apparently prompted Archer's injuries days before. And the woman beside him? His daughter, Sophia, ambitious, Harvard-educated, which is unusual in our circles, runs their legitimate businesses. Victor's tone carried a hint of reluctant respect. "She's been trying to arrange a marriage alliance with the Sterling family for years." This information produced an unexpected flare of something Wren refused to acknowledge as jealousy. "With Archer?" Victor's slight smile suggested he'd caught her reaction. "Mr. Archer has consistently declined, which has created additional tensions between the families." Before Wren could inquire further, a stir at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Thomas Sterling entered, leaning on a carved ebony cane, but otherwise showing remarkable vitality for a man who'd been bedridden days earlier. Archer followed, scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of someone accustomed to identifying threats. His gaze found Wren immediately, something unreadable flickering in his expression as he took in her transformation. He excused himself from his father's side and moved through the crowd with purpose, people instinctively shifting to allow him passage. "You look stunning," he said simply when he reached her, voice pitched for her ears alone. "Your father shouldn't be up," she replied, though a flush of warmth spread through her at the compliment. "His lungs aren't strong enough for this." "I know, but appearances matter in our world." Archer offered his arm. "Allow me to introduce you to some people you should know." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, judges whose chambers mysteriously never received certain cases against Sterling associates, police captains whose precincts reported lower crime rates in Sterling territories, business owners who supplied legitimate fronts for more profitable ventures. Wren smiled and nodded, filing away names and connections, building a mental map of the Sterling Empire's reach. Throughout it all, Archer kept her at his side, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. She noted how others responded to this subtle claiming. Men became more deferential, women more assessing. "Your nurse cleans up nicely," Thomas Sterling commented when they joined him near the fireplace. His breathing labored but disguised behind a facade of strength. "Almost wouldn't recognize her without that stern expression she uses when torturing me with breathing exercises." "I reserve that expression for difficult patients," Wren replied, earning an appreciative chuckle from the old man. "Archer, you should introduce Miss Holloway to Judge Patterson," Thomas suggested with calculated casualness. "He's been asking about our newest household member." Archer's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Of course. As they moved away, Wren asked quietly, "What was that about?" "Patterson has connections at Mercy General," Archer explained. "Board of directors. He's likely curious about your departure from their employment." Alarm flared through her. "He knows Dr. Spencer?" "Most likely." Archer guided her toward a distinguished gray-haired man holding court near the windows. "Follow my lead." Judge Patterson proved to be exactly the kind of man Wren had learned to be wary of in her nursing career, outwardly dignified and respected, yet with eyes that assessed women as possessions rather than people. His handshake lingered too long, his gaze drifted too freely. "Miss Holloway," he said, recognition lighting his features. "I believe Herbert Spencer has mentioned you. You worked under him at Mercy, did you not?" The deliberate phrasing "under him" made Wren's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. "I did, briefly, before joining the Sterling household." "A rather dramatic career change," Patterson observed. "Spencer spoke quite colorfully about your departure." Before Wren could respond, Archer's arm slid around her waist, drawing her closer to his side. "Wren's medical expertise has been invaluable to my family," he said, his tone pleasant but with an undercurrent of steel. "Though her role has evolved beyond professional capacity alone." The implication was unmistakable. Patterson's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see," he said, gaze shifting between them. "Well, that explains certain discrepancies in Dr. Spencer's account." "Does it?" Archer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd be very interested to hear what specifically the good doctor has been saying about Miss Holloway, particularly if it conflicts with the truth." The tension crackling beneath the civilized veneer of conversation was palpable. Patterson, clearly recognizing dangerous territory, backpedaled smoothly. "Nothing of consequence, I'm sure. Hospital politics, you understand. Always gossip when talented staff move on." He checked his watch with theatrical precision. "If you'll excuse me, I promised the commissioner I'd discuss that property matter before dinner." As Patterson retreated, Wren released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Though I could have handled him." "I know you could have," Archer replied, his arm still around her waist. "But in this room, messages need to be sent clearly. Patterson will ensure Spencer understands you're now untouchable." Before Wren could respond to this statement, both reassuring and unsettling, a crash from across the room drew everyone's attention. Thomas Sterling had collapsed, his cocktail glass shattered on the marble floor, his face contorted in a spasm of coughing. Wren was moving instantly, medical instincts overriding all else. She reached the old man's side just as Carlo Rossetti was helping him to a chair, feigning concern while clearly assessing weakness. "Give him air," she commanded, her professional voice cutting through the worried murmurs. "Mr. Sterling, can you hear me?" Thomas nodded weakly, his breathing alarmingly labored, lips tinged with blue. Wren's fingers found his pulse rapid, thready. "He needs oxygen," she told Archer, who had materialized at her side. "And his medication." Now, without hesitation, Archer lifted his father into his arms despite the old man's feeble protests. "Victor, clear the study. Quinn, get Miss Holloway's medical supplies from her room." The guests parted as Archer carried Thomas from the room, Wren following closely, already mentally cataloging what she'd need. Behind them, conversation exploded like wildfire. The vulnerability of the Sterling patriarch now confirmed beyond doubt. In the study, Archer laid his father on a leather couch as Victor secured the door. Thomas's breathing had deteriorated further, each inhalation a painful struggle, his fingers clutching at his chest. "Oxygen first," Wren directed Quinn as he arrived with her supplies. "Then prepare an injection of the digoxin. He's going into heart failure secondary to respiratory distress." She worked with practiced efficiency, positioning the oxygen mask, preparing medications, monitoring vital signs. Throughout it all, Archer remained at his father's side, outwardly calm but with fear evident in the tightness around his eyes. After 20 agonizing minutes, Thomas's breathing began to ease, his color slowly improving. The immediate danger had passed, but Wren's professional assessment was grave. "He needs complete bed rest," she told Archer quietly. "No visitors, no business, no exceptions." This episode was severe. The next could be fatal. Thomas, still too weak to speak, but conscious enough to hear, made a feeble gesture of protest. "Not negotiable," Wren told him firmly. "Not if you want to live." "The dinner," Thomas rasped, "is over for you," Archer said with gentle authority. "I'll handle it. All of it." Something passed between father and son, then an understanding beyond words. Thomas closed his eyes in acquiescence. perhaps for the first time in his life surrendering control to another. Once they had moved Thomas to his bedroom and ensured his stability, Wren found herself alone with Archer in the hallway outside. The elegant dinner party continued below, though subdued, awaiting the return of their host. "You have to go back," she said, practical despite her exhaustion. "They'll be watching for signs of weakness, especially the Rosettas." Archer nodded, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair. "I know, but my father—" "I'll stay with him," Wren promised. "I won't leave his side." For a moment, Archer's carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing the weight he carried: son, heir, protector, all while watching his formidable father diminish before his eyes. "I've never seen him like this," he admitted quietly. "He's always been indestructible." The vulnerability in his confession touched something in Wren. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding his in a gesture of simple human connection. "No one is indestructible," she said softly. "Not even Thomas Sterling." Archer looked at their joined hands, then back to her face. "Except perhaps you," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Standing in a room full of Chicago's most dangerous criminals, giving orders like a battlefield general. "Just doing my job," Wren replied, though they both knew it had become far more than that. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended in a moment of shared understanding. The barriers between them, employer and employee, criminal and nurse, man and woman, temporarily dissolved by common purpose and concern. Then Archer straightened, composure returning like armor being donned. "I need to go address our guests, make excuses, salvage what can be salvaged." He hesitated, then added, "When this is over, when my father is stable, we should talk about your future here." "I'll be here," Wren said simply. It was no longer a question of her 1-week trial period or her decision to stay or go. In this moment of crisis, she had already made her choice, though its full implications remained to be seen. As Archer descended to rejoin the dinner party to maintain appearances, protect family interests, and manage the vultures who had scented weakness, Wren returned to Thomas's bedside, settling in for a night of vigilant care. She was now irrevocably part of the Sterling world, bound to it not just by professional obligation or financial necessity, but by something deeper and more complex: loyalty to a dying man, and feelings for his son that she was no longer certain she could or wanted to deny. 3 weeks after Thomas Sterling's collapse at the dinner party, the atmosphere at the mansion had transformed. The old crime boss remained confined to bed, his condition stabilized but fragile. Wren had established a rigorous care routine, with Eleanor and 2 trusted housemaids assisting in shifts. More significantly, Wren's status within the household had subtly shifted. Staff now deferred to her authority in matters concerning the elder Sterling's care, and even Victor treated her with a grudging respect previously reserved for family members. Archer had been largely absent, dealing with the fallout from his father's public weakness. The power dynamics of Chicago's underworld were delicate, and Thomas Sterling's illness had sent tremors through carefully balanced alliances. When Archer did return to the mansion, often late at night, he would check on his father and then seek out Wren for detailed updates on his condition. These late-night consultations had developed their own intimate rhythm, Wren reporting medical progress over cups of tea in the study, Archer gradually sharing more about the family business, the pressures he faced, the legacy he was struggling to preserve. Neither acknowledged the growing connection between them, though both felt its pull. On this particular evening, Wren found herself alone in the library, reviewing medical journals for any treatments that might strengthen Thomas's weakened heart. The mansion was quieter than usual. Many of the staff had been given the night off, and the skeleton security crew maintained their posts with minimal disruption. The telephone's ring startled her from her research. After 3 rings, she realized no one else was responding and picked up the receiver. "Sterling residence," she answered cautiously. "Is this Miss Holloway?" a male voice asked, unfamiliar, with the careful diction of someone educated but trying to disguise it. "Who's calling?" "A friend, with information Mr. Sterling needs immediately regarding Mercy General Hospital." Wren's grip tightened on the receiver. "Mr. Sterling isn't available. I can take a message." "No message. Just tell him Dr. Spencer is planning to release Thomas Sterling's medical records to Carlo Rossetti tomorrow morning, for a considerable sum." Her blood ran cold. "Who is this? How do you know that?" "Someone who owes Archer Sterling a favor. Tell him to check the hospital administration office tonight if he wants proof." After midnight, the line went dead, leaving Wren staring at the receiver in shock. Thomas Sterling's full medical records would be devastating in enemy hands, revealing not just his current condition but old bullet wounds, evidence of previous criminal activities, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. If Dr. Spencer had accessed those records, she reached for the study telephone, dialing the number Archer had given her for emergencies. No answer. The club line rang endlessly as well. Wherever Archer was tonight, he was unreachable. Eleanor entered, carrying a tray of medicines for Thomas's evening treatment. "Eleanor, do you know where Mr. Archer is tonight? It's urgent," the housekeeper frowned. "Meeting with the commissioner and Judge Patterson, I believe. Won't be back until late." Wren made a quick decision. "I need a car, and someone to stay with Mr. Thomas while I'm gone." "Miss Holloway," Eleanor began, clearly alarmed. "Mr. Archer was very clear that you shouldn't leave the estate without." "This concerns his father's safety," Wren interrupted. "I wouldn't ask otherwise." After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor nodded. "I'll have Quinn bring the car around. He can drive you and provide protection." Quinn was one of the younger security men, competent but not part of Archer's inner circle. He seemed equally uncomfortable with the arrangement as he helped Wren into the back seat of the black Packard. "Where to, Miss Holloway?" "Mercy General Hospital," she replied, determination overriding the anxiety churning in her stomach. "And hurry." The hospital looked different at night, more ominous, the white corridors eerily silent except for the occasional nurse making rounds. Wren had insisted Quinn wait with the car. Her former uniform and confident stride would get her further than a suspicious man in a suit clearly concealing a weapon. She navigated the familiar hallways with practiced ease, avoiding the busier nursing stations. The administration offices would be locked, but Wren knew from her years of employment that the night custodian often left the connecting door from the records room unlocked to simplify his cleaning routine. The records room was dimly lit, filing cabinets stretching in neat rows. Wren slipped inside, listening for any sounds of activity. Silence. She moved toward the administration door, testing the handle gently. Unlocked, as she'd hoped. The administration office beyond was dark, except for moonlight streaming through Venetian blinds, creating striped shadows across the desk surfaces. Wren hesitated, uncertain what exactly she was looking for. Proof of Spencer's betrayal, but in what form? She began with Spencer's desk, carefully searching through stacked papers. Nothing unusual. The filing cabinets yielded similar results. She was about to check the department head's office when she heard the soft click of the main door opening. Wren froze, heart hammering. Footsteps approached, too heavy to be a nurse. She slipped behind a tall cabinet, pressing herself into the shadows as the office door swung open. Dr. Nathan Spencer entered, followed closely by a man Wren recognized from the dinner party, one of Carlo Rossetti's associates. Spencer switched on a desk lamp, casting the room in partial light. "The Sterling files are in the safe," Spencer was saying, moving toward a painting on the wall. "I've pulled everything: medical history, current diagnosis, treatment records." "Rossetti wants confirmation of the old man's condition," the other man replied. "Is he dying or not?" Spencer swung the painting aside, revealing a wall safe. "Based on what I've gathered, he's in heart failure secondary to pneumonia. Without hospital care, his chances are poor." "And you're certain Sterling's nurse can't save him? The daughter's apparently some kind of miracle worker." Wren's breath caught at this reference to herself. Spencer laughed bitterly. "Holloway, she's competent enough with basic care, but she's no doctor. She wouldn't recognize the signs of digitalis toxicity until it was too late." Digitalis toxicity. The words echoed in Wren's mind. Thomas's medication, the digoxin she administered daily to strengthen his heart, could be lethal in excess. If someone were to tamper with the dosage, "You're sure these records will help Rossetti make his move?" the associate asked as Spencer worked the safe's combination. "They detail every weakness the old man has, every vulnerability. And with the Sterling boy distracted by his father's decline and his infatuation with that nurse, the timing couldn't be better." Spencer swung open the safe door and removed a thick file folder. "Here it is. Every medical secret Thomas Sterling has ever." The office door banged open. Quinn stood there, gun drawn, face tight with panic. "Miss Holloway, we have to go. Now." Spencer whirled, shock registering at the sight of Wren's guard. The Rossetti man reached inside his jacket, but Quinn was faster, his weapon already aimed. "Don't," Quinn warned, gesturing for Wren to come out of hiding. "Miss Holloway, please." Wren stepped from the shadows, facing Spencer for the first time since he'd destroyed her career. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with calculated assessment. "Well," he said smoothly, recovering his composure. "Isn't this interesting?" The disgraced nurse returns, breaking into private offices. "More grounds for criminal charges, I think." "Save it, Spencer," Wren replied coldly. "I heard everything. You're selling sterling medical records to the Rossettis. Allegedly, Spencer smirked. Your word against mine. Again. Miss Holloway, Quinn insisted, more urgently. The Rossetti men outside, they made me. More are coming. We need to leave immediately. Spencer's smirk widened. Seems you've walked into something bigger than you realized, Holloway. The Rossettis have been planning this for weeks. The records are just confirmation of what they already suspected. The implications hit Wren like a physical blow. The dinner party. Thomas's collapse wasn't coincidental. Stress can exacerbate existing conditions, Spencer said with mock medical concern. Especially when someone might have added something to his drink. Quinn grabbed Wren's arm. Now, Miss Holloway, we need to warn Mr. Sterling. Torn between the desire to confront Spencer further and the urgent need to get back to the mansion, Wren allowed Quinn to pull her toward the door. The Rossetti associate made no move to stop them, merely watching with calculated interest. Oh, Miss Holloway, Spencer called as they reached the doorway. Give my regards to Mr. Sterling. Tell him his father's medication requires very careful monitoring. It would be tragic if there were any dosage errors. The threat was unmistakable. Wren's last glimpse of Spencer was his satisfied smile as he handed the sterling medical records to the Rossetti man. Outside, the hospital parking lot was ominously populated with cars that hadn't been there when they arrived. Quinn hustled Wren toward their vehicle, constantly scanning for threats. How did they know we were here? Wren asked as they reached the Packard. Quinn's expression was grim. I don't think they were following us. I think they were already coming for those records. We just had bad timing. As they pulled away from the hospital, Wren noticed 2 cars detaching from the shadows to follow them. Quinn, we have company. I see them, he replied tensely, accelerating through a yellow light. Hold on. What followed was a harrowing chase through Chicago's nighttime streets. Quinn's skilled driving versus the determination of their pursuers. Wren gripped the seat as they took corners at alarming speeds, tires screeching in protest. We can't lead them back to the mansion, she realized aloud. Not if they're planning something against Mr. Thomas. Mr. Archer has a safe house on the north side, Quinn said, executing a sharp turn down an alley. I'll try to lose them, then get you there. For a few blocks, it seemed they might succeed. Then a 3rd car appeared ahead, blocking their path. Quinn swerved, narrowly avoiding collision, but the maneuver cost them their lead. The pursuing vehicles closed in, one pulling alongside, the driver raising what was unmistakably a gun. Get down! Quinn shouted, pushing Wren toward the floorboard as the night erupted with gunfire. Glass shattered. The Packard swerved violently, then spun, tires shrieking against pavement. Wren felt the sickening impact as they collided with something solid, then nothing but darkness. Wren awoke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back at Mercy General, that everything the train station, Archer, the Sterling mansion had been a dream. Then pain lanced through her head as she tried to sit up, and reality crashed back. The accident, Quinn, the Rossettis. Easy, a woman's voice cautioned. You've got a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Wren turned carefully to find a nurse she didn't recognize adjusting her IV. Where am I? Street Elizabeth's Hospital. You were brought in last night after a car accident. The man I was with. The driver? The nurse's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry. He didn't make it. Grief and guilt crashed over Wren. Quinn had died protecting her, driving her on an ill-advised mission that had only confirmed what they'd already suspected. The Rossettis were moving against the Sterlings, using Thomas's illness as their opportunity. How long have I been here? Wren asked urgently. About 14 hours. You were unconscious when they brought you in. 14 hours. Too long. If the Rossettis had the medical records, if Spencer had revealed the vulnerability to digitalis toxicity, if they had an insider at the Sterling mansion, I need to use a telephone, Wren said, already trying to push herself up despite the stabbing pain. It's an emergency. You need to rest, the nurse objected. Doctor's orders. Lives are at stake, Wren insisted. Please. Something in her desperate expression must have convinced the nurse, who hesitated before nodding. There's a phone at the nurse's station. 5 minutes, no more. The walk to the station was excruciating, every breath sending fresh pain through Wren's ribs. She dialed the Sterling mansion with trembling fingers, praying someone would answer. Sterling residence, came Eleanor's voice, tight with strain. Eleanor, it's Wren. Listen carefully. Thomas's medication. Has anyone administered his digoxin today? Miss Holloway, thank God. Mr. Archer has been searching everywhere for you. Quinn's body was found, But you weren't. Eleanor, focus, Wren interrupted. The medication. Who's been caring for Mr. Thomas since I left? A pause. Maria took over your duties. She's been following your written instructions exactly. Maria, the newest housemaid, hired just after Thomas's collapse. Wren had never fully trusted her quiet efficiency, her too convenient appearance just when extra help was needed. Don't let her near him, Wren said urgently. Check the digoxin vial. I think it may have been tampered with. And get a message to Archer immediately. The Rossettis are making their move today. Miss Holloway, where are you? Mr. Archer needs to. Street Elizabeth's hospital. But I'm not staying. Tell Archer what I said about the medication and Maria. I'll explain everything else when I see him. Wren hung up before Eleanor could protest further. The hospital would try to keep her, cite medical concerns, insist she wasn't stable enough for discharge. She didn't have time for that. In her room, she found her clothes, blood-stained but wearable, neatly folded in a cabinet. Changing was agony, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her injured body. But urgency drove her forward. She had to get back to the mansion, to Thomas, to warn Archer about what she'd discovered. Avoiding the nurses required all her knowledge of hospital routines and shift changes. She waited until medication rounds created a distraction, then slipped down the service stairs and out through the laundry delivery entrance. Outside, late afternoon sunlight momentarily blinded her. Wren took stock of her situation. No money, no transportation, injured, and miles from the Sterling estate. But she did have one advantage: she knew Chicago, its streetcar routes, its shortcuts. The journey was a nightmare of pain and determination. 2 streetcar transfers, a desperate plea to a sympathetic cab driver who agreed to take her part of the way without upfront payment, and finally a mile-long walk through neighborhoods that grew increasingly exclusive as she approached the North Shore. By the time she reached the Sterling estate gates, twilight was settling over Chicago. The guard stationed there recognized her immediately, his expression shifting from shock to relief. Miss Holloway, Mr. Sterling said to watch for you, but we didn't expect. He took in her battered appearance, the dried blood still visible on her clothing. My God, are you all right? I need to see Mr. Archer immediately, she managed, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Is he here? Just arrived back, ma'am. He's with his father, Thomas. The thought gave her renewed strength as the guard helped her toward the house. If she was too late, if Maria had already administered a lethal dose of digitalis, the mansion was in an unusual state of alert, more guards visible, staff moving with heightened urgency. Eleanor intercepted them in the foyer, her normally composed face registering alarm at Wren's condition. Miss Holloway, you should be in the hospital, Thomas, Wren insisted. Is he alive? Thanks to your warning, Eleanor assured her, supporting Wren's weight as they moved toward the stairs. I checked the medicine like you said. It had been replaced with a much stronger concentration. Maria tried to flee when questioned, but Mr. Archer's men caught her before she left the grounds. Relief made Wren's knees buckle. Not too late. They'd caught the saboteur. Mr. Archer is with his father now, Eleanor continued, guiding Wren carefully up the stairs. He's been beside himself since learning of Quinn's death and your disappearance. The scene in Thomas's bedroom was one Wren hadn't expected. The old crime boss was awake, propped up against pillows, his color better than it had been in weeks. Archer stood by the window, talking intently with Victor and 2 other lieutenants Wren recognized from previous visits. The atmosphere was tense but focused preparations for conflict rather than grief for a loss. Archer looked up as they entered, his controlled expression cracking at the sight of Wren, bloodstained, bruised, but undeniably alive. For a heartbeat, naked emotion flashed across his face. Relief, joy, something deeper that neither was prepared to name. Wren, he breathed, crossing the room in long strides. Without hesitation, without regard for their audience, he pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her obvious injuries yet unwilling to maintain distance. Wren found herself leaning into his embrace, the fortress of her professional reserve crumbling under the weight of all they'd endured. Quinn? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Dead, Archer confirmed, his voice tight with controlled fury. Shot through the windshield before the crash. You disappeared from the wreckage before police arrived. I was unconscious, she explained. Someone must have taken me to Street Elizabeth's, the Rossettis. Thomas spoke from the bed, his voice stronger than Wren had heard in weeks. Making sure you weren't dead. They need you alive. Wren pulled back from Archer's embrace, confused. What? Why would they want me alive? Victor stepped forward. Because, Miss Holloway, You're now their primary leverage against the Sterling family. Understanding dawned slowly through Wren's concussion-fogged mind. The Rossettas had seen her with Archer at the dinner party, had watched his protective stance, noted how he'd introduced her to key allies. They'd concluded, not incorrectly, that she held value to him beyond professional services. Maria was instructed to eliminate me and make Thomas's death appear natural, she deduced. Then what? Use me as a hostage during the power transition? Precisely, Thomas confirmed. With me dead and Archer distracted by your captivity, they could move against our operations with minimal resistance. Archer's expression had hardened into something dangerous, but they failed, thanks to you. Not entirely, Wren countered, wincing as she shifted position. They still have your father's medical records. They know his vulnerabilities, his condition, and after last night, they know I discovered their plan. Which means they'll accelerate their timeline, Victor added grimly. We're expecting a direct move against our territory within 24 hours. Thomas Sterling struggled to sit up straighter. We need to strike first, hit Rossetti before he's fully prepared. No, Wren said with unexpected force, drawing surprised looks from everyone. That's exactly what they want, open warfare while Thomas is still vulnerable. She turned to Archer. Your father is improving, but he's nowhere near strong enough to withstand another crisis. The Rossettas know this. They're counting on chaos, on your emotional response. A flicker of surprise crossed Archer's face at her strategic assessment. What do you suggest? Misdirection, Wren replied without hesitation. Let them think their plan is working. Spread word that Thomas has taken a turn for the worse, that you're focused on his care rather than business operations. Thomas chuckled appreciatively. Meanwhile, we prepare our defenses and identify their points of attack. Exactly, Wren confirmed, impressed by the old man's quick grasp of her thinking. Medical deception is sometimes necessary for patient survival. A reluctant smile touched Archer's lips. And here I thought you were strictly ethical, Nurse Holloway. Ethics adapt to circumstances. Mr. Sterling, she replied, a ghost of their earlier formality, returning despite the intimacy of their reunion. As we both know, Victor exchanged a significant look with Thomas, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We'll give you both a moment, the old crime boss said with unusual tactfulness. Victor, help me review those distribution schedules we discussed. After they departed, Archer guided Wren to a chair, his touch gentle but firm. You should be in a hospital, he said, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. Broken ribs, concussion. I've treated worse with less, she interrupted. And I couldn't stay there, not knowing what was happening here. You risked your life, he stated, not a question but an observation tinged with wonder. For my father, for this family. Wren met his gaze directly. For you, she corrected quietly. I came back for you, Archer. The admission hung between them, neither willing to retreat from its implications. This was no longer about professional obligation or financial arrangement. Something fundamental had shifted between them, nurse and patient son, employee and employer, woman and man. When Quinn died protecting me, Wren continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it, I realized how deeply I'd become invested in the Sterling world. In your world, not just as a nurse or employee, but as someone who cares what happens here, who cares about you. Archer took her hand, his touch unexpectedly tender for a man accustomed to violence. I thought I'd lost you, he admitted, the confession clearly difficult for him. When they found the car, Quinn's body, but not you. I've never felt fear like that before. The vulnerability in his voice, the unguarded emotion in his eyes, told Wren everything words couldn't. This dangerous, complex man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld had discovered his own weakness. I'm not easy to get rid of, she assured him with a small smile. As you may have noticed, his answering smile faded quickly. The Rossettas will try again. As long as you're connected to me, to this family, you'll be at risk. I know, Wren acknowledged. But I'm choosing this. Choosing to stay, despite the danger. For a moment, Archer seemed about to say more, perhaps to offer her an escape, a way back to the safer life she'd once known. But they both recognized the impossibility of return. Too much had happened, too many lines crossed. Instead, he simply nodded, accepting her decision with the respect of someone who understood difficult choices. Then we face what's coming together. As twilight deepened outside the window, Wren realized she had indeed made her choice, not just to stay at Sterling Manor, not just to continue caring for Thomas, but to stand beside Archer as he confronted the threats to his family and legacy. She had entered this world by chance, a freezing nurse rescued from a train station, but she would remain by choice a woman who had found unexpected purpose, unexpected strength, and most surprisingly of all, unexpected love in the most dangerous place imaginable. The Rossettis were coming. Chicago's underworld stood on the brink of war, and somehow, improbably, Wren Holloway had become not just a witness to history, but a participant in its making. The Sterling mansion transformed overnight into a fortress. Guards patrolled the grounds in rotating shifts, windows were reinforced, and trusted lieutenants arrived hourly with updates from throughout the city. At the center of this controlled chaos, Archer orchestrated the family's response with methodical precision, while Wren divided her attention between Thomas's care and her own recovery. 3 days after Wren's return from Street Elizabeth's, the Rossettis still hadn't made their anticipated move. The waiting created its own particular tension, like the oppressive stillness before a thunderstorm. "They're being cautious," Thomas observed during his afternoon examination. His strength was returning gradually, though Wren insisted on limiting his involvement in business matters. "Rossetti expected me to be dead by now, you to be their captive, and Archer to be distracted. Instead, he's facing a unified Sterling response. Your son is thorough in his preparations," Wren acknowledged, checking Thomas's pulse. "Too thorough sometimes," the old man replied with unexpected candor. "Carries the weight of everything himself. Always has, even before his mother died." This casual reference to Archer's past caught Wren's attention. Despite their growing closeness, Archer rarely spoke of his personal history. "How old was he when she passed?" Wren asked, keeping her tone professionally neutral as she recorded Thomas's vital signs. 15. Thomas's weathered face softened with memory. "Eleanor. Beautiful woman. Too good for this life, really. She wanted Archer to go to college, become a lawyer, had plans for him to be legitimate in ways I never could be. What happened to her?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Car accident. At least, that's what the police report said." The implication was clear. "You don't believe it was an accident?" "Never did." Thomas adjusted his position against the pillows. "No proof, but the timing was suspicious. I just refused a partnership with the Rossi family, Carlo Rossetti's uncle." 2 weeks later, Eleanor's brakes failed on Lakeshore Drive. Wren absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. Archer's controlled exterior, his reluctance to form attachments, his fierce protection of family all stemmed from losses that had shaped him. "Does Archer know your suspicions?" "He's always known," Thomas replied grimly. "Why do you think he's so methodical about security? Why he keeps people at a distance?" The old man studied her with shrewd eyes. "Until you..." Before Wren could respond to this assessment, the bedroom door opened. Victor entered, his normally impassive face tense with urgency. "Mr. Thomas, Miss Holloway, we have a situation. Judge Patterson just arrived with Commissioner Howard. They're demanding to see you both." Thomas straightened, immediately alert. "What do they want?" "They claim to have a warrant for Miss Holloway's arrest, for Quinn's death." The accusation was so absurd that Wren nearly laughed. "That's ridiculous. Quinn was killed protecting me. Apparently there's a witness claiming you were driving, that you caused the accident while fleeing a crime scene at Mercy General." Victor's expression conveyed his disgust at the fabrication. "Dr. Spencer has signed a statement alleging you broke into his office and stole narcotics." The Rossettis' strategy became instantly clear. Unable to eliminate or capture Wren directly, they were using their influence with corrupt officials to remove her, legally separating her from the Sterlings while simultaneously discrediting her. "Where's Archer?" Thomas demanded. "Downtown. Meeting with the alderman about the dockworkers' strike. We've sent word, but..." "I'll handle this," Thomas declared, already pushing himself to his feet despite Wren's protests. "Help me dress, Victor. Miss Holloway, stay here until I call for you." "Mr. Sterling, you're not strong enough for this kind of confrontation," Wren objected. Thomas's smile held grim determination. "My dear, I've been dealing with corrupt officials since before you were born. Trust me, sometimes the old fox still remembers his tricks." When Wren was summoned to the study 30 minutes later, she found Thomas Sterling seated behind the massive desk, looking every inch the crime boss despite his illness. Judge Patterson and Commissioner Howard sat opposite him, both men visibly uncomfortable. A document that appeared to be the arrest warrant lay torn in half on the desk. "Ah, Miss Holloway," Thomas greeted her with theatrical warmth. "These gentlemen were just leaving. It seems there was a misunderstanding regarding that unfortunate incident the other night." Patterson shifted nervously. "As I was explaining, the witness testimony appears to have been unreliable." We'll be conducting a more thorough investigation before proceeding further." "How considerate," Thomas remarked, his pleasant tone belied by the steel in his eyes. "And the matter of Dr. Spencer's accusations?" Howard cleared his throat. "We'll be reviewing those claims as well. Preliminary evidence suggests possible inconsistencies in his statement." "Imagine that," Thomas said softly. "Victor, please show our guests out. And gentlemen," his voice dropped to a dangerous register, "I trust this concludes our business on this matter. Permanently." After they departed, Thomas sagged slightly in his chair, the effort of maintaining his formidable facade taking its toll. Wren rushed to his side, medical concern overriding curiosity about what had transpired. "You need to rest," she insisted, checking his pulse. "Your heart can't handle this kind of stress." "Worth it," Thomas replied with grim satisfaction. Reminded them who really runs this city, and more importantly, who protects you now. Before Wren could respond, the study door burst open. Archer stormed in, face tight with controlled fury. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, taking in the scene his father's exhaustion, Wren's concern, the torn warrant on the desk. "Rossetti tried using Patterson and Howard to remove Miss Holloway from our protection," Thomas explained. "I persuaded them it would be unwise to proceed." "Persuaded how?" Archer asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "I reminded the good judge about certain photographs from last year's hunting trip in Wisconsin, and the commissioner suddenly remembered who finances his brother-in-law's construction business." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Wren found herself impressed by the old man's strategic mastery. Thomas Sterling might be physically weakened, but his mind remained razor-sharp. "You should have waited for me," Archer said, the tension in his voice betraying how deeply the threat to Wren had affected him. "I was already on my way when I got Victor's message." "Time was of the essence," Thomas replied. "And besides, I needed to see if I could still handle this kind of negotiation." He smiled wryly. "Apparently I haven't lost my touch." A look passed between father and son, pride, respect, and a wordless acknowledgement of shared purpose. Then Thomas turned to Wren. "If you don't mind, my dear, I think I will take your advice about resting now. That was more exertion than I've attempted in weeks." After helping Thomas back to his bedroom and ensuring he was comfortably settled, Wren found Archer waiting in the hallway, his face unreadable. "Walk with me," he said simply, offering his arm. They moved through the mansion in silence, eventually reaching the conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden room rarely used by the family. Winter sunlight filtered through frosted panes, illuminating exotic plants and creating a peaceful oasis untouched by the tension gripping the rest of the house. "This was my mother's favorite room," Archer said suddenly. "She would read here for hours, especially during winter when the garden outside was dormant." The personal revelation surprised Wren. "Your father mentioned her earlier. He said she had different plans for your future." "She wanted me at Harvard Law School," Archer confirmed, a hint of wistfulness in his voice, "following a path far removed from my father's world." "And what did you want?" Wren asked gently. Archer's gaze turned distant. "I was 15 when she died. At that age, I wanted what most boys want: my father's approval, my mother's pride. After she was gone." He trailed off, the unfinished thought hanging between them. "After she was gone, you protected what remained of your family," Wren finished for him. "You stepped into the role that was expected of you." "There was never really a choice," Archer said simply. "But sometimes I wonder what she would think of the man I've become." The vulnerability in his admission touched Wren deeply. This was Archer Sterling stripped of pretense, not the feared heir to a criminal empire, but a son still haunted by his mother's dreams for him. "I think," Wren said carefully, "she would see a man who protects those under his care, who honors his obligations, who fights for what matters to him." Archer turned to her then, his expression softening. "When Patterson and Howard came for you today, I was across town. The thought that I might not reach you in time." He shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. "But you would have," Wren said with quiet certainty. "Just as you found me at that train station. Just as you'll find a way through this conflict with the Rossettis." "You have remarkable faith in me," he observed, studying her face as though memorizing its features. "Not faith," Wren corrected. "Evidence. I've seen what you're capable of, Archer. Both the darkness and the light." For a moment, they stood in perfect stillness, winter sunlight casting gentle patterns across their faces. Then Archer reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "When this is over," he said softly, "when the Rossetti threat is neutralized and my father is stronger, We need to discuss what happens next. For you. For us. The promise in those words, the acknowledgement of something between them that transcended their original arrangement, filled Ren with both anticipation and uncertainty. Yes, she agreed. When this is over, but fate had other plans for when and how that conversation would unfold. The attack came at dawn, when the mansion's security rotation was changing shifts. Not a frontal assault as might have been expected, but something far more insidious. A delivery truck bearing the logo of a local bakery, a regular supplier to the Sterling household. Ren was checking on Thomas, who had slept poorly following the previous day's exertions, when the first explosion rocked the foundation of the mansion. Plaster dust sifted from the ceiling as security alarms blared throughout the house. "Stay with my father," Archer commanded, appearing in the doorway with gun already drawn. "Victor's bringing reinforcements to secure this wing." "What's happening?" Thomas demanded, struggling to sit up. "Rossetti," Archer replied grimly. "They've breached the perimeter. 3 explosives at different points along the wall. It's a diversion," the old man realized immediately. "They're creating chaos while their main force targets something specific." "You," Ren said, the strategy suddenly clear. "They still think you're the primary target." Archer nodded. "Which gives us an advantage they don't expect. Stay here, both of you. This room is the most secure in the house." He moved to leave, but Ren caught his arm. "Be careful." Something passed between them, unspoken emotion. The acknowledgement that they had moved beyond employer and employee, protector and protected, to something deeper and more complex. "Always," he promised, then was gone, the door locking automatically behind him. The next hour passed in tense silence, broken only by distant gunfire and the occasional muffled explosion. Thomas insisted on being fully dressed, refusing to meet potential attackers from a sickbed. Ren prepared emergency medical supplies, mentally reviewing treatment protocols for gunshot wounds and other trauma. When the bedroom door finally opened, they both tensed, but it was Eleanor who entered, her usual composure shattered. "They're inside the house," she reported breathlessly. "Mr. Archer says to move, Mr." Thomas to the panic room immediately. The east wing has been compromised. The panic room, a reinforced chamber hidden behind a bookcase in Thomas's study, had been prepared days earlier as a last resort. Ren helped Thomas to his feet, monitoring his exertion carefully as they followed Eleanor through the mansion's service corridors. The sounds of conflict grew louder as they approached the main floor, shouted commands, the crash of breaking glass, sporadic gunfire. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and disorienting. "Stay close," Eleanor directed, leading them through the kitchen where terrified staff huddled beneath counters. "The study entrance is still secure." They had almost reached the study door when a figure lunged from a side hallway, one of Rossetti's men, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Thomas. "For Carlo," he shouted. Several things happened simultaneously. Ren shoved Thomas aside with strength born of desperation. Eleanor screamed a warning. The gun fired, the report deafening in the enclosed space. Ren felt the bullet's impact like a hammer blow to her shoulder, spinning her against the wall. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and consuming. Through a haze of shock, she was dimly aware of more gunfire, of the Rossetti man collapsing, of Victor appearing from nowhere to secure the area. "Get them to the panic room," someone ordered. Miss Holloway's hit. Strong arms lifted her Victor's. She realized carrying her through the study door as darkness threatened the edges of her vision. She fought to remain conscious, medical training asserting itself through the pain. Shoulder wound, significant bleeding, possible shock developing. The panic room was smaller than she'd imagined, a concrete chamber with basic furnishings, medical supplies, and communications equipment. They laid her on a cot as Eleanor pressed bandages to her wound. "How bad?" Thomas asked, his face pale with concern. "Through and through," Victor assessed, cutting away Ren's bloodied sleeve. "Clean exit wound, but she's losing blood fast." "Pressure," Ren managed through gritted teeth. "Direct pressure and elevate." Even injured, she couldn't suppress her nurse's instincts. Victor followed her instructions, packing the wound with professional efficiency. "Archer?" she asked, fighting to stay focused. "Leading the counterattack," Victor replied. "Rossetti miscalculated. We were ready for them." The pain was becoming overwhelming, consciousness slipping despite Ren's determination to stay awake. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Thomas's voice, surprisingly gentle. "Hold on, my dear. My son needs you to hold on." Ren drifted through cycles of consciousness and darkness. Sometimes she was aware of voices around her, Victor coordinating defenses over a radio, Eleanor changing her bandages, Thomas issuing commands from what seemed to have become a command center within the panic room. When she finally emerged fully into consciousness, the first thing she saw was Archer, slumped in a chair beside her cot. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his forearm. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and exhaustion lined his face. "How long?" she asked, her voice a rasp. Archer's eyes snapped open at the sound. "Ren," he breathed, relief washing over his features. 26 hours. You've been in and out. The attack? Neutralized." His expression hardened. Rossetti overplayed his hand. Assumed we'd be unprepared, that my father would be an easy target. Ren tried to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through her shoulder. "Carlo Rossetti? Dead." Archer stated it factually, without emotion. "Along with his top lieutenants, the Chicago underworld has been restructured." The clinical detachment in his voice couldn't quite mask the underlying reality. Archer Sterling had eliminated his enemies with ruthless efficiency, cementing the Sterling family's position at the top of Chicago's criminal hierarchy. "You took a bullet meant for my father," Archer continued, his controlled facade finally cracking to reveal raw emotion. "Why would you do that?" "Instinct," Ren replied simply. "No." Archer shook his head. "That wasn't instinct. That was choice. You chose to risk your life for his. For your family," Ren corrected softly. "Which means for you." The admission hung between them, stripping away the last pretenses. Archer took her uninjured hand, his touch gentle despite the violence he'd so recently orchestrated. "When I saw you fall," he said, voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "When I thought I might lose you. Nothing else mattered. Not the territory, not the business, not even family legacy. For a man whose entire existence had been defined by duty to family and organization, this confession represented a seismic shift. Ren understood its significance immediately. "What happens now?" she asked. Archer seemed to steel himself for what came next. "That depends on you, on what you want." "What I want?" Ren repeated, surprised by the deference in his tone. "You've fulfilled your obligation to my father many times over. His health is improving daily. The Rossetti threat is eliminated. You're free to leave Chicago, start fresh somewhere without the shadows of either Spencer's accusations or Sterling connections." He was offering her an exit. She realized a clean break from the dangerous world she'd been drawn into. It was, in its way, the most selfless gesture he could make. "Is that what you want?" she asked carefully. "For me to leave?" "What I want," Archer replied with uncharacteristic hesitation, "is irrelevant if it means keeping you in danger." "That's not an answer." Archer met her gaze directly, dropping the last of his carefully maintained barriers. "No, I don't want you to leave. I want you here, with me. But I've seen what happens to those too close to the Sterling name. My mother, Quinn, now you." His jaw tightened. "I won't be responsible for destroying another life I care about." The unspoken word hung between them, not care, but something deeper, more profound. Something neither had dared acknowledge until this moment. "I think," Ren said carefully, "that you're making the same mistake Dr. Spencer made." Archer's brow furrowed in confusion. "You're deciding what's best for me without asking what I want," she clarified, "assuming you know better than I do about my own life." Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by a reluctant smile. "A dangerous comparison, but accurate," Ren insisted. "I'm a nurse, Archer. I've spent my career making informed decisions about risk and benefit. I know exactly what being connected to your family means. And yet you took a bullet for my father," he observed. "For your family," she corrected again. "A choice I made knowingly, just as I'm making this one." She pushed herself up straighter, ignoring the pain radiating from her shoulder. "I don't want an exit. I want a place here not as an employee, not as someone under your protection, but as a partner. Someone who stands beside you, not behind you." The boldness of her declaration hung in the air between them. For a man accustomed to control in all things, who kept others at carefully calculated distances, she was proposing something revolutionary, a true partnership, equal despite the obvious disparities in their positions. "You understand what you're asking?" Archer said finally. "My world isn't going to change overnight. There are aspects of the business that will always exist in gray areas." "I'm not asking for transformation," Ren replied. "I'm asking for evolution, the same kind you've already begun moving toward legitimacy where possible. Minimizing unnecessary violence, building something that can survive beyond your father's generation." Archer studied her face, searching for uncertainty or naivete and finding neither. This was not a woman with romantic illusions about reforming a criminal. This was a pragmatist who saw both the man and the organization clearly, and still chose to remain. Evolution, he repeated thoughtfully. My father would say that's how empires survive, not by clinging to old methods, but by adapting to changing times. Wise man, your father, Wren observed with a small smile. Occasionally, Archer conceded, returning her smile with one of his own, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. Though he'd be insufferable if he heard me admit it. I heard that, came Thomas's voice as the old crime boss entered the room, looking stronger than he had in weeks. And I agree with the nurse. Evolution is our path forward. He fixed his son with a penetrating gaze. The question is whether you're ready to walk it. With her. The directness of his father's challenge momentarily silenced Archer. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for Wren's hand again, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm in what had become a gesture uniquely theirs. I believe I am, he said simply. Thomas nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Because I've been thinking about our medical investment opportunities, expanding the legitimate portfolio. Miss Holloway's expertise would be invaluable in that area. The casual way he incorporated Wren into future plans, family plans, was his own form of acceptance, not just of her presence in their lives, but of the fundamental change she represented in the Sterling organization's trajectory. Now, Thomas continued briskly, when you're recovered, we should discuss the foundation I'm establishing, the Sterling Medical Research Foundation, focusing on cardiac care initially, for obvious reasons. His eyes twinkled with unexpected humor. I thought you might consider directing it, Miss Holloway. Once you've finished nursing me back to health, of course. The offer, a legitimate position leveraging her medical knowledge, a path to respectability while remaining connected to the Sterling family, was clearly Thomas's wedding gift, offered before Archer had even formally proposed. That's presumptuous, father, Archer observed, though without heat. Practical, Thomas corrected. Chicago is changing. Post-war boom coming. Old ways of doing business won't sustain us. We need new blood. New thinking. His gaze shifted between them meaningfully. New partnerships. After Thomas left them alone again, Wren turned to Archer, the weight of possibility settling between them. A foundation, she mused. Legitimate medical research funded by increasingly legitimate business interests, Archer finished. It won't happen overnight. Some operations will take years to transition. Others may never fully convert. But as a direction, he hesitated. Would that be enough? This in-between world I'm offering? Wren considered the question seriously, understanding its significance. Archer Sterling was proposing transformation not just of their relationship, but of his entire organization, his life's purpose and legacy. All because a freezing nurse at a train station had somehow awakened something long dormant within him. It's not about enough, she replied finally. It's about choice, my choice. And I choose this path, with you, wherever it leads. The simplicity of her acceptance seemed to overwhelm him momentarily. Then, with careful deliberation, he leaned forward and kissed her, not the desperate embrace of their earlier encounters, but something deeper, a promise sealed between equals. When they parted, Archer's expression held a certainty Wren had never seen before. When you're recovered, he said softly, we'll make it official. All of it, your position with the foundation, your place in this family. If that's what you want. It is, Wren confirmed, the last of her doubts dissolving in the face of this new future they would build together. Though I think your father's already planning the wedding. Thomas Sterling always did prefer to be 3 steps ahead, Archer acknowledged with a wry smile. In this case, however, I find I don't mind his presumption. As Chicago rebuilt from the war years and America entered its post-war boom, the Sterling Medical Research Foundation would become one of the city's most respected institutions. The underworld would whisper about the nurse who had transformed Chicago's most dangerous crime family, gradually steering them toward legitimacy without sacrificing their power. And history would remember how a chance encounter at a train station during a blizzard had forever changed the landscape of power in the Windy City, proving once again that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most extraordinary destinies. Spring arrived in Chicago with unusual gentleness that year, as if the city itself were recovering from winter's harshness. At Sterling Manor, windows that had remained shuttered during the Rossetti conflict were thrown open to admit fragrant breezes and warming sunlight. The garden, long neglected as a security liability, bloomed under Eleanor's renewed attention, roses and hydrangeas planted in honor of Archer's mother returning to their former glory. Wren's recovery progressed steadily, though slower than her impatient nature preferred. The bullet wound to her shoulder had done significant damage, requiring weeks of rehabilitation to restore full mobility. She approached her own recovery with the same determined professionalism she'd shown with Thomas, following medical protocols exactly, pushing the limits of pain without exceeding them, and recording her progress with clinical precision. On this particular morning in late April, she sat in the conservatory, exercising her injured arm through the prescribed range of motion exercises. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, warming the exotic plants that surrounded her. It was here, amid greenery that had once been his mother's sanctuary, that Archer found her. "The doctor says your recovery is remarkable," he observed from the doorway, watching her methodical movements with admiration. "The doctor is easily impressed," Ren replied with a small smile. "I'm still at least 2 weeks from full strength." Nevertheless, Archer crossed to join her, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him in a casual shirt with rolled sleeves. "He's cleared you for increased activity, including leaving the estate." This caught Ren's attention. Since the Rossetti conflict, security protocols had kept her largely confined to Sterling Manor and its immediate grounds, a restriction she'd accepted as necessary during her recovery, but was increasingly eager to leave behind. "Where did you have in mind?" she asked, setting aside her exercise equipment. "A few places," Archer replied with uncharacteristic vagueness. "There are some matters requiring your input." "Medical matters?" "Among others," he confirmed cryptically. "Can you be ready in an hour?" Intrigued by his mysterious manner, Ren agreed. Whatever Archer was planning, it represented her first real venture back into Chicago since the night she'd confronted Dr. Spencer at Mercy General a lifetime ago, it seemed. Eleanor helped her dress in a tailored spring suit that concealed her healing shoulder, while flattering her figure another of the housekeeper's mysterious acquisitions that always seemed to fit perfectly. When Ren descended to the foyer, she found not just Archer waiting, but Thomas as well, looking more robust than he had in months. "Good. You're ready," Thomas said briskly. "We have a schedule to keep." "We?" Ren questioned, looking between father and son with growing suspicion. "You're coming too?" "For the first stop only," Thomas clarified. "Doctor's orders prevent me from overexertion. Isn't that right, Nurse Holloway?" "Absolutely," Ren agreed, though her medical concern was tempered by curiosity about what the Sterling men were planning. "Which is why I'm surprised you're venturing out at all." "Some occasions warrant breaking protocol," Thomas replied with enigmatic satisfaction. "Even medical protocol." The sleek black Cadillac that awaited them bore little resemblance to the vehicle Quinn had driven. That fateful night, a deliberate choice, Ren suspected, to avoid triggering painful memories. Victor drove with 2 security cars following at a discreet distance, a reminder that despite the peaceful spring morning, the Sterling family never truly lowered its guard. Their first destination surprised her a stately building in the financial district with Chicago Trust and Banking emblazoned across its marble facade. "A bank?" Ren questioned as Victor opened her door. "Among other things," Archer replied, offering his arm as Thomas joined them on the sidewalk. Inside, they were immediately greeted by the bank president himself, a distinguished man whose deferential manner toward the Sterlings spoke volumes about their influence. They were escorted past the main banking floor to a private elevator that descended rather than ascended. "The bank vault?" Ren guessed. "Something like that," Thomas answered with cryptic amusement. The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with private secure rooms, the kind wealthy families used to store valuables beyond their homes. The bank president unlocked a heavy door marked Sterling Holdings, then discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in a room containing a large table surrounded by leather chairs. "Please, sit," Archer directed, pulling out a chair for Ren. As she did so, Thomas produced a leather portfolio from inside his jacket and placed it on the table with ceremonial formality. "4 months ago," the old crime boss began, "a freezing nurse with extraordinary courage found her way into our family. Since then, she has saved my life, taken a bullet in my defense, and most remarkably begun to civilize my son." Ren felt heat rise in her cheeks at this unexpected pronouncement. "The Sterling family has existed in Chicago for 3 generations, Thomas continued, his tone shifting to something more formal. "Our interests are extensive, our influence significant. What began as necessary survival in a hostile city has evolved into an organization with both legitimate and alternative business operations." He opened the portfolio, revealing legal documents bearing official seals. "What you see before you are the incorporation papers for the Sterling Medical Research Foundation, capitalized with an initial endowment of $5 million. Ren's breath caught. The amount was staggering, a fortune that could fund medical research and treatment for thousands. The foundation will be governed by a board of 7 trustees, Thomas explained. Myself, Archer, 3 respected medical professionals, a legal representative, and you, as executive director. He slid the documents toward her. Your official title, should you accept, will be Dr. Wren Holloway, executive director of medical research. Doctor? Wren questioned, caught by the unexpected title. An honorary doctorate from Chicago Medical College, Archer explained. In recognition of your contributions to emergency medicine, the dean is a family friend who understands your unique qualifications. The implications were clear. The Sterlings were not just offering her a position, but crafting a new identity that bridged her nursing background with a respectable professional future, a path that would allow her to practice medicine at the highest levels despite Dr. Spencer's earlier attempts to destroy her career. This is overwhelming, Wren admitted, scanning the detailed legal language that outlined the Foundation's charitable mission, governance structure, and her own substantial compensation package. There's more, Archer said, reaching for another document within the portfolio. This establishes your personal trust, independent of the Foundation. Separate from Sterling family holdings, this second document revealed a personal fortune placed in her name, property, securities, and liquid assets that would ensure her financial independence regardless of her relationship with the Sterling family. Understanding dawned. You're making sure I have options, she said softly. Freedom to leave if I choose. Thomas nodded approvingly. Smart girl. Always was. He looked to his son with undisguised pride. Told you she'd understand immediately. The Foundation is genuine, Archer assured her, his expression earnest. Its medical mission is real, its funding secure, but your position within it or outside it remains entirely your choice. No conditions, no obligations. The gesture was profound in its implication. For men who had built their empire on control and loyalty, to offer such unconditional freedom represented a fundamental shift in worldview. They were not binding her to them through financial dependency or shared culpability, but offering partnership with the explicit freedom to walk away. And if I accept the position? Wren asked, already knowing her answer but wanting to hear theirs. Then you help guide the Sterling legacy toward its future, Thomas said simply. Using our resources to heal rather than harm. Building something that outlasts all of us, while maintaining your independence, Archer added, the intensity in his gaze conveying deeper meaning. Your identity separate from ours. Your professional standing earned through your own merit. Wren considered the documents before her the tangible manifestation of everything she'd discussed with Archer during her recovery. Not an overnight transformation from criminal enterprise to legitimate business, but a gradual evolution, with medical philanthropy as its public face. I accept, she said finally, reaching for the fountain pen Thomas offered. Both the Foundation position and the trust. Though the latter seems excessive. Not at all, Thomas countered, as she signed the documents with careful deliberation. Consider it an advance on future contributions to the family. The knowing glance he exchanged with his son made Wren suspicious that this was only the first of the day's orchestrated revelations. Her intuition proved correct when, after Thomas excused himself to return to the mansion with Victor, doctor's orders, after all. Archer guided her back to the waiting car with the promise of one more stop. This time, their destination was Michigan Avenue, Chicago's most prestigious shopping district. The driver stopped before an elegant storefront displaying custom jewelry behind discreet velvet pedestals. Archer? Wren questioned, her heart rate accelerating. Indulge me, was his only reply, as he escorted her into the shop. The owner greeted them personally, immediately leading them to a private viewing room in the rear of the store. On a black velvet tray lay 3 ring boxes, each closed. I thought you might appreciate options, Archer explained, suddenly seeming almost nervous in emotion Wren had never associated with the confident heir to Chicago's most powerful family. The first, the jeweler explained, opening the leftmost box, is classic. 3-carat diamond, platinum setting, Art Deco styling reminiscent of the 1,920 seconds. The ring was undeniably beautiful, elegant, refined, and worth more than Wren had earned in 5 years at Mercy General. The second, he continued, revealing a stunning sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds. Mr. Sterling thought might complement your eyes. Archer's attention to such a detail made Wren's breath catch. For a man whose world revolved around power and strategy, this glimpse of romantic consideration was unexpectedly moving. And the third, the jeweler concluded, opening the final box to reveal a more unique design, an emerald-cut diamond in a setting that incorporated subtle medical symbols within its platinum filigree, was custom designed to reflect your profession. Notice the caduceus motifs. Wren stared at the 3 rings, momentarily speechless. Though she and Archer had acknowledged their feelings for each other, though the household had treated their relationship as established fact, neither had formally proposed or accepted a permanent commitment. "If none appeal," Archer said quietly, misinterpreting her silence, "the jeweler can create something entirely custom." "No," Wren replied, finding her voice. "They're all beautiful, but—" She reached for the 3rd ring, its thoughtful incorporation of her identity as a healer touching her deeply. "This one feels like me, like us." Relief and pleasure transformed Archer's expression as he took the ring from its velvet bed. With uncharacteristic uncertainty, he knelt before her, Chicago's most dangerous man, humbling himself in a gesture of vulnerability that would have shocked anyone who knew only his public persona. "Wren Holloway," he began, his customary confidence giving way to genuine emotion. "You came into my life as a freezing nurse with nothing but defiance and determination. You've become everything. My conscience, my partner, my future." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" The simplicity of his proposal, direct, unembellished, sincere, perfectly embodied the man himself. Wren found herself smiling through unexpected tears. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Though I should warn you, I intend to continue being defiant and determined as your wife." "I would expect nothing less," Archer replied, sliding the ring onto her finger with visible satisfaction. "The Sterling family has survived this long by recognizing and valuing strength, especially when it challenges us." As they left the jewelry store, Wren's new ring catching the spring sunlight, she realized how dramatically her life had transformed in the 4 months since that freezing night at Central Station. From desperate nurse with nowhere to turn to fiancé of Chicago's most powerful man and director of a multi-million-dollar medical foundation. "One last surprise," Archer said as they reached the car, though perhaps not as momentous as the previous 2. Their final stop was an elegant limestone building in a fashionable neighborhood near Lake Michigan. Unlike the bank or the jewelry store, this destination's purpose wasn't immediately obvious. "What is this place?" Wren asked as they ascended the front steps. "Home," Archer replied, producing a key. "If you approve." The door opened to reveal a spacious, light-filled residence, not as grand as Sterling Manor but impressive in its own right, with classical architecture balanced by modern amenities. As Archer led her through the rooms, Wren noted thoughtful details. A fully equipped medical library, a garden visible through French doors, and a master suite with windows oriented to catch both sunrise and sunset. "I thought you might want a place that's ours," Archer explained as they completed the tour. "Separate from Sterling Manor, closer to where the foundation offices will be established." The consideration behind this gesture, providing not just a home but independence from the main Sterling household, touched Wren deeply. Archer was offering not just marriage but partnership, respecting her need for autonomy even as they joined their lives. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "Though I hope your father won't feel abandoned." "He suggested it," Archer admitted with a wry smile. "Said we needed our own establishment if we're to build the Sterling legacy for the next generation." The implication, children, family, future, hung between them, neither uncomfortable nor pressured, simply acknowledged as a natural evolution of their path together. As they stood in what would become their home, Wren's hand in his, the ring symbolizing their commitment glinting in the afternoon light, Archer seemed to come to a decision. "There's something else you should know," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "A decision I've made about the family business." Wren waited, sensing the significance of whatever would come next. "After the Rossetti conflict, I've been restructuring our operations," he continued, "accelerating the transition toward legitimate business interests. The violence, what happened to you, to Quinn, it made me reevaluate our methods." "You're leaving the criminal enterprises behind?" Wren asked, careful not to sound judgmental either way. "Not overnight," Archer clarified. "That would create a power vacuum potentially more dangerous than our controlled management. But I've begun divesting from certain activities, protection rackets, liquor distribution, gambling operations, focusing instead on property development, shipping, entertainment venues." He met her gaze directly. "I can't promise a complete transformation. Some aspects of our world will remain in gray areas for years to come, but I can promise that our children won't inherit the same dangers that shaped my childhood. That our legacy will be built on creation rather than control." The commitment he was making not just to her, but to their future together represented perhaps the most profound change of all. Not because Wren had demanded it, not because circumstances forced it, but because Archer himself had recognized the opportunity for evolution. "Our children," Wren repeated softly, the phrase both terrifying and exhilarating. "I like the sound of that." As the afternoon sun cast golden light across what would become their home, Archer pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her healing shoulder. The kiss they shared was both promise and confirmation of partnership, of transformation, of a future neither could have imagined that winter night at Central Station. The Sterling Holloway wedding of 1948 became the social event of the season in Chicago, bringing together worlds that rarely intersected: medical professionals, political figures, business leaders, and the carefully sanitized upper echelons of what newspapers delicately called Chicago's alternative business community. The ceremony at Holy Name Cathedral represented the public legitimization of both their relationship and the Sterling family's evolving position in society. Wren wore ivory satin rather than traditional white, a nod to the honest acknowledgement of their unconventional path to the altar. Thomas Sterling, looking remarkably vital despite his ongoing heart condition, escorted her down the aisle with unmistakable pride. Eleanor served as matron of honor, her usually stoic demeanor softened by genuine emotion for the young woman who had become like family. Archer waited at the altar, his customary control momentarily forgotten as he watched his bride approach. Victor stood beside him as best man, the loyal lieutenant who had protected both Sterlings through countless dangers, now bearing witness to this new chapter in the family legacy. Their vows, written together during quiet evenings in the conservatory, spoke not of blind devotion, but of equal partnership, mutual respect, and shared purpose. When Archer placed the wedding band beside her engagement ring, both symbols of commitment that went beyond traditional expectations, Wren felt the weight of history bending toward something new and hopeful. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the bishop declared, his presence another indicator of the Sterling family's influence even within Chicago's religious institutions. The kiss that sealed their union was both public declaration and private promise, restrained for the audience, yet conveying depths that only they fully understood. The reception that followed at the Palmer House Hotel transformed its grand ballroom into a showcase of elegance and power. A 12-piece orchestra played as Chicago's elite congratulated the newlyweds, many making their first public appearance at a Sterling family function, a testament to how effectively Archer had begun reshaping their reputation. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling," Judge Patterson offered, his deference now genuine rather than fearful. "The medical foundation is a tremendous asset to our city." "Thank you, Judge," Wren replied with practiced grace. "And it's Dr. Holloway Sterling professionally, though Mrs. Sterling in social settings." The deliberate correction, gentle but unmistakable, established her independent identity even as she embraced her new family connection. Throughout the evening, she navigated these dual roles with increasing confidence, the accomplished medical director and the wife of Chicago's most enigmatic power broker. Thomas Sterling watched the proceedings with evident satisfaction, occasionally accepting congratulations but primarily observing his son and new daughter-in-law as they moved through the crowd with complimentary precision. When the orchestra announced the father-son dance, traditionally performed with the bride's father, Thomas surprised the gathering by taking Wren's hand himself. "I hope you don't mind the presumption," he said as they moved across the floor with unexpected grace for a man of his age and condition. "Since your father isn't with us." "I'm honored," Wren assured him, genuinely moved by the gesture. "The honor is mine," Thomas replied, his usual gruffness softened by the occasion. "You've given this family something we desperately needed, my dear." "Medical care?" she suggested lightly. "Hope," he corrected, surprising her with his candor. "For generations, the Sterlings have survived through fear, through control. Necessary in the beginning, perhaps, but ultimately limiting." His gaze drifted to Archer, who was speaking with the mayor nearby. "My son has always been caught between worlds, his mother's dreams for legitimacy, my reality of necessary compromise. You've shown him a path forward that honors both." The insight into family dynamics that had shaped Archer's life touched Wren deeply. "I think he was already finding that path," she said diplomatically. "I just walked it with him." Thomas's knowing smile suggested he wasn't fooled by her modesty. "In our world, my dear, companions for difficult journeys are rare indeed. Rarer still are those who make us want to be better versions of ourselves." He squeezed her hand gently as the music concluded. "Thank you for being both to my son." Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Archer drew Wren onto a quiet balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city spread before them, its lights glittering against the darkness, beautiful from a distance, complex and contradictory up close. Happy? He asked, his arm encircling her waist. More than I thought possible, she admitted, leaning into his embrace. Though I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong in this world. You created your own place in it, Archer corrected. That's more impressive than simply being born to it as I was. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city that had brought them together, its harsh winters and tenacious spirit, its capacity for both cruelty and unexpected kindness. I have something for you, Archer said finally. A wedding gift. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet pouch. Inside was a delicate gold locket, antique in design yet timeless in its simplicity. It was my mother's, he explained as he fastened it around Ren's neck. The only piece of her jewelry my father kept when she died. She wore it every day. The significance of the gift, this tangible connection to the mother whose dreams for her son had been cut short, brought tears to Ren's eyes. Archer, I can't. Open it, he encouraged gently. Inside the locket were 2 photographs, one of Archer's mother, her resemblance to her son unmistakable in her eyes and the set of her jaw, and one of Central Station, snow-covered and stark against a winter sky. To remember where we began, Archer explained, and who helped shape what we're becoming. The thoughtfulness behind the gift, honoring both his past and their shared beginning, embodied everything about the man she had married. Beneath the controlled exterior, beyond the power and danger, existed this capacity for profound sentiment that so few were privileged to witness. It's perfect, Ren whispered, closing the locket gently. Thank you. As midnight approached, they slipped away from the reception, leaving Chicago's elite to continue celebrating without them as they departed for a brief honeymoon at the Sterling family's lake house in Wisconsin. The transition from public figures to private individuals happened the moment they entered the waiting car, Archer visibly relaxing as the hotel disappeared behind them. One stop before we leave the city, he said, directing the driver with quiet authority. To Ren's surprise, they pulled up before Central Station, the place where their improbable story had begun just 5 months earlier. In the spring night, the station looked entirely different from the frozen wasteland where Archer had found her, yet the bench where she had sat remained, illuminated by a single street lamp. Why are we here? She asked as he helped her from the car. Closure, Archer replied, leading her toward the entrance. And new beginning. Inside, the station was nearly deserted at this late hour, a few solitary travelers dozing on benches or waiting quietly for connections. The bench where Ren had sat that December night stood empty, unremarkable except for the memories it held for them both. I was desperate that night, Ren said softly as they stood before it. Out of options, out of hope. And I was empty, Archer added, his voice equally quiet. Going through the motions of power without purpose. Then I saw you refusing to surrender despite everything stacked against you. They sat together on the bench, Ren's elegant wedding gown incongruous against the utilitarian surroundings, Archer's tuxedo marking him as clearly out of place among late-night travelers. If you hadn't stopped, Ren mused. If you had driven past, I would have missed everything that mattered, Archer finished for her. Some choices define us more than we realize in the moment. From his pocket, he produced a small silver object, a key on a simple chain. What's this? Ren asked. The key to a safe deposit box, he explained, containing 2 train tickets to anywhere in the country, new identification documents, and enough cash to start over completely. An escape route, if you ever need it. The gesture, practical, protective, yet fundamentally respectful of her autonomy, epitomized their relationship. Even now, as husband and wife, Archer was ensuring her freedom to choose remained intact. A wedding gift? She asked, accepting the key with a raised eyebrow. A promise, he corrected. That your future with me will always be your choice, not your obligation. Ren closed her fingers around the key, understanding its significance, not because she intended to use it, but because its very existence represented a level of respect rarely found in marriages of their era, particularly in Archer's world, where control was currency and loyalty was survival. I choose you, she said simply, tucking the key into her evening purse. Today and tomorrow and all the days that follow. But I appreciate the option. Archer smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his features from intimidating to almost boyish. I would expect nothing less from the woman who broke Dr. Spencer's nose with a bedpan. It was a scalpel, Ren corrected, laughing despite herself. I only threatened the bedpan. Either way, Archer replied, helping her to her feet. The most formidable woman in Chicago, and now, my wife. As they left Central Station arm in arm, stepping into the spring night as husband and wife, neither could have predicted exactly how their story would unfold in the decades to come. They couldn't know that the Sterling Medical Research Foundation would eventually become one of the Midwest's premier medical institutions, pioneering treatments that would save thousands of lives. They couldn't foresee how their partnership would transform Chicago's power structures, gradually shifting the Sterling influence from shadow operations to legitimate enterprises without sacrificing their fundamental strength. And they certainly couldn't imagine that 50 years later, their grandchildren would dedicate the Holloway Sterling wing of Chicago Memorial Hospital, on the very site where a desperate nurse and a mafia millionaire had first crossed paths during a winter blizzard. What they did know, as their car pulled away from Central Station and toward their future, was that they had found something neither had believed possible: a love forged in crisis, tested by violence, and ultimately transformative not just for themselves but for the city they would help reshape. Over the years, as Chicago evolved from post-war industrial center to modern metropolis, the story of Archer Sterling and Ren Holloway became part of the city's folklore, whispered in hospital corridors, discussed in business schools, romanticized in unofficial histories of the city's most powerful families. Some versions emphasized the danger the nurse who tamed Chicago's most feared crime lord. Others focused on the transformation, how love had gradually legitimized an empire built on less savory foundations. The most accurate tellings acknowledged the complexity, how two people from vastly different worlds had found in each other not just passion or security, but partnership that allowed both to become more than they might have been alone. But all versions agreed on one essential truth: that winter night in 1947, when a mafia millionaire found a freezing nurse at Central Station, had changed not just two lives but the very fabric of Chicago itself, proving once again that history's most enduring legacies often begin with the simplest acts of human connection. Thomas Sterling lived to see his 80th birthday, long enough to hold his first great-grandchild and witness the Sterling name become associated more with philanthropy than fear. When he finally succumbed to the heart condition Ren had helped manage for over 2 decades, the funeral brought Chicago to a standstill, a testament to how completely the family had transformed its position in society. Ren and Archer's marriage spanned 6 decades, weathering the changes of post-war America, the turbulent social transformations of the 60s and 70s, and the economic shifts of the Reagan era. Throughout it all, they maintained the balance they had established that spring night at Central Station, equal partners with independent identities, united by choice rather than necessity. When asked on their 50th anniversary for the secret to their enduring marriage, Ren's answer was characteristically direct. "We never forgot where we began, or how easily we might never have found each other at all. Every day together has been a choice, not an obligation. That makes all the difference." Archer, by then known more as a philanthropist and business leader than the dangerous young man he had once been, simply added, "We recognized strength in each other when the rest of the world saw only vulnerability. Everything else followed from that." As they stood that day on the steps of the newly dedicated hospital wing, surrounded by family and community leaders, few would have connected these distinguished elderly figures with the desperate nurse and dangerous mafia heir who had once occupied the same space under such different circumstances. But Ren, touching the antique locket still worn at her throat, and Archer, his hand resting at the small of her back in that familiar protective gesture, exchanged a private smile that bridged decades, remembering the freezing night, the train station bench, and the unlikely journey that had made history in ways neither could have imagined. The legacy they built together, medical advances, community development, gradual legitimization of a once-feared family name, would endure in concrete and steel, in institutions and foundations. But perhaps their greatest achievement was proving that even in the harshest winter, in the most desperate circumstances, transformative connection can bloom, changing not just individual lives but the very course of history itself.